Welcome everyone to this Australia Day episode of the Racist Law. I'm Fenian and I've got Kyber mates stepping in for Nolsey again today. And yeah, Kyber, how's your Australia Day going?
It's going nice and quietly. I was actually unaware that all the pubs are closed today, so I've got to triple back on all of my plans right now. How about yourself, Fenian?
Well, yeah. Yeah, I think I'm playing it by ear as well. And it's all just kind of quiet at the moment. I started it off by getting up earlier than I usually would on Australia Day to finish the prep today. So there you go. See, my blood, sweat, and tears. It really does go into this show.
And we deeply appreciate the effort you put into this show.
Yeah, it just meant I didn't get my usual sleep in on Australia Day, but not a big deal. Okay, well, of course, we have to start off today's episode with a general discussion on Australia Day and the debate that seems to get more and more tension-stricken every year. I was just watching ABC earlier, and they're covering all of the Invasion Day rallies that are happening right now, right across the country. And a lot of them, what's kind of sad actually is a lot of them they're doing the Palestine thing as well. It's like it's almost as much a Palestine march as it is for either scrapping Australia Day or moving it. I think they just want to scrap it.
I share that opinion.
I mean, one of the Aboriginal activists I saw just earlier, it was this big, fat, lesbian-looking woman, was saying, like, no.
Is there any other kind?
Well, she was a black fella as well, as she kept calling herself. And she said, no, absolutely not. We don't support moving the day because we just think Australia Day in and of itself, whatever day it lands on, is a celebration of genocide and wiping out of people. So she's like, no, like that's too soft for us. We want to just simply abolish it, get rid of it. And
can we abolish their welfare payments if we're not celebrating Australia? I mean, I'm at the point where I would just openly say that to their faces and say, if you hate this country, stop collecting money from the government.
I mean, I've always said that I support autonomous Aboriginal zones where we carve out pieces of land for them. But there's a very, very strict condition attached to that, which is you cannot get bailed out by the surrounding Australian state. You are on your own completely to eat witchetty grubs and do witch doctor rituals or whatever the hell it is you do, but you cannot come to us for a handout. That's the deal. And that's why they never really talk about that, about, like real sovereignty like that, or at least the clever ones don't, because they know how unfeasible it is. It could never actually work. I mean, the closest thing we've got to like an Aboriginal state would be Papua New Guinea. And, they still...
They eat one another over there.
Yes, they still have
as Nolsey has often reminded us.
To this day, they still practice cannibalism, okay? That is like, you can kind of imagine what it would look like. And by the way, we bail out PNG every year. In return for them doing some of our offshore processing of illegal refugees. But anyway, what are the kind of things that have been happening? What else has been happening today? Well, the Sydney Opera House has been lit up with, what Nine News calls Indigenous artwork. What I could see with one of the still frames is just 4 Aboriginal people, clearly Aboriginal people. And, when I was driving through the city yesterday, and everything that was up about Australia Day was always talking about how it's a day of inclusion for everyone, right? So even those who are still celebrating Australia Day, or at least feel that they're compelled to, they still have to add that caveat in, don't they? That like, hey, don't think we're just celebrating this as a European holiday. Or, the day where Australia officially became a kind of European colony. We're not doing that at all. We're actually just celebrating the civic virtues of the country that encompass everyone. So they have to, it's still cucking in a way, I think. Inserting that caveat all the time. And, even those who are going out there on Sky News defending Australia Day, saying that we need to continue it, they will say that every time. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's always a CivNat argument. I would say no. Like, let's actually look at this. This was a prime example of European expansion of civilization moving beyond the shores of Europe, and Australia, as we know it, although it's changing, but at least how we used to know Australia is that of a European colony, and I can't really see it any other way.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity to push back on the multicultural Australia and agree with liberals agree with leftists for the wrong reason, as was once said, and sort of point out when they say, yeah, this is a day where we worship and recognize European accomplishments. You just look them square in the eyes and say, yeah, that's what it's all about. Why should I settle for anything less at this point?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when they talk about it, like, being hurtful and it being to the detriment of Aboriginal people, I mean, they have a point in a way. I would not say, though, that, like, they're like a defeated people in a way. Like, I remember David Hiscox.
Fucking quiet if they were.
Yeah, I mean, look, many of the half castes, the activist class of Aboriginal people who are never ever full blood, some of them, I guess, they probably do carry a kind of, I'm part of a defeated race mentality. They might do that, but I mean, why is that? It's not actually because we defeated Aborigines. How could you actually defeat a group of people who did not put up armed resistance? This is the thing. This is a great myth. Like the frontier wars, that they were exercising some kind of guerrilla warfare tactics to repel the invader. It's just not true. When you look at any of those attacks that happened, the so-called guerrilla war tactics, it was them stealing stuff. They were just going in and looting and stealing, like stealing grain, stealing blankets and supplies, and livestock. That's all it ever was. But yeah, when they say that it's at least like, I guess you could say, humiliation for Aboriginal people, and yeah, it is, because of the fact that they never did anything with this country. Been here 40,000 years, invented a stick.
Oh, not even. I think they just picked one up off the side of the road. I mean, the myth about the boomerang, that was a surprise to me to find out. No, they didn't actually sort of, like, it's all invented. Like, these people are just inbred lost Dravidians.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, so I'm not a sports ball fan, but Cricket Australia has basically decided to snub Australia Day. Well, at least they did. It looks like they've kind of walked it back a little bit. So Chris Minns, who is a Labor Premier of New South Wales, has actually said that Australians should be outraged at the snub of Australia Day by cricket and other sporting codes. So I guess sort of tough words by a Labor Premier.
Yeah.
I don't know if he would still be saying the same things in a few years' time as their Overton window begins to shift. But I just wanted to play. This is I'm just going to play some quick audio from Cricket Australia boss Nick Hockley. So this is where he was talking about their plan to snub Australia Day, and this is Ben Fordham. Okay.
What day is it on Friday?
Oh, look, Friday's a great national holiday for everyone. But firstly, I would say I just want to appreciate the opportunity to come on and to clarify a few things.
But can we just clarify that first of all? What day is it on Friday?
Friday is the 26th of January. It's the Australia Day public holiday weekend.
So why is it so hard to say that as Cricket Australia?
You notice how reluctant he was to actually say Australia Day. And even when he finally did say it, he referred to as January 26th Australia Day public holiday. Yeah. He was like, he drew it up as like a legal concept,
Yeah,
rather
he
than
framed
an
it as a
actual
public. And I wish nothing but pain and suffering upon these people, legally and with due process. But I like the fact that they're being squeezed between their I don't even know if you could call it donor class, but we all know, who's putting the pressure on them for this. But at the same time, their core audience is likely composed of civ nats, of not just boomers, but of all age demographics that are very pro Australia Day, despite most of them probably having Asian wives and so forth. And this guy knows he's got to appease two very different groups, and there's no clear answer. And again, my catchphrase of probably eternity at this rate will be Zweitsong, where he has to make a move, and every move option is bad, where he's going to piss off one group or the other.
Right. You got to walk that tightrope.
Got to walk that fine line. So,
yeah, and I mean, it can be hard. You'd think you'd kind of have all those lines pre-prepared, or at least, he was no match for Ben.
The most surprising part is, like, you would think they have a PR department that would have, workshopped 100 different phrases for him to say, or at least given him flashcards to look at. Again, that's sort of the wildest part, is like how they know what they want to say, which is, no, this is a day where we all need to be somber and reflection. Just the fact that they don't have some canned response ready to go for this is highly surprising at this point.
Well, I mean, he did, referring to it as the public holiday and that kind of thing. But, Ben Fordham wasn't really letting him get away with that, which is good, even though he still sees it, entirely from a CivNat perspective, but that's all right. I'd rather see some resistance against all of this stuff than none. And even if we are framing it this way, okay. I mean, it's sort of, it's not strong enough, though. It's not strong enough because, people generally don't die for civic virtues or whatever. They die for their people, or, they're willing to sacrifice for their people. And that's why I think one of the reasons why CivNat arguments always ring so hollow. It's because they don't resonate with people's core feelings. Because, yeah, it's just, it's hard to feel that strong about legal concepts and, philosophical concepts of what it means to be a nation. It doesn't resonate very much. Anyway, on to the local councils. We've said before that there are over 80 local councils across Australia who have moved their citizenship ceremonies away from January 26. So Scott Morrison actually made that illegal. He stepped in and said, no, you must have these ceremonies on January 26. Albo since reversed that position in 2022, meaning that you can have those ceremonies 3 days before or after. Now, we've got, the exact number is 81. 81 councils have decided to move those ceremonies. Now, focusing on just one of them, this is one in New South Wales. This is the Belligan Shire. They're saying that they're doing a Woolworths here. They're citing two reasons. The first one is that they're saying they've just got dwindling numbers. Not that many people turn up to these ceremonies anymore. And then the other reason is that, well, to quote here from one of the councillors, it's a really hurtful day for a lot of people. So they've got a political agenda in there, which is that latter point. It's a hurtful day for people. But the former point on dwindling numbers, well, look, I'm not surprised by that fewer and fewer people are see it as a good thing to turn up to one of these ceremonies. And it's basically what I said before about how can this sort of resonate with people's core feelings when being Australian is simply about having the right identity documents. And that's
Australian
it.
identity is to steal one of Nolsey's lines, an Australian citizenship or even a residency permit is equivalent to a Costco membership at this point.
Yeah, pretty much. It's as soulless as doing a shop in Aldi. It just means nothing. So I think they do actually have a point when they say that, part of this is just dwindling numbers. And also the people who are coming over here, are not really Australian, or at least not what Australian used to be. So their friends and families aren't really going to care either. They're just more interested in getting membership in this particular economic zone because it's better than whatever shit heap country they've come from. That's it. That's what they're celebrating, is purely economic.
It's an escape ceremony, escape reward ceremony. Congratulations, yes. You've escaped the brown shithole. You get to live in a slightly less awful shithole.
Right. While you take jobs and drive up prices and reduce the supply of housing and drive up rents. It's infuriating. Anyway, so look, Woolworths have sort of gone in damage control since their decision not to stock Australia Day merchandise. The CEO, so who's this guy? Brad Banducci. I believe he is a South African man of Italian heritage. I did do a quick search, and I don't believe this guy's Jewish. So just to make that clear. So he did an interview on 7:30 the other night where, he again tried to walk that tightrope. But he is saying that the primary reason for the decision to stop stocking the merchandise was actually economic. He did acknowledge that they certainly listened to the people out there who don't like Australia Day and want to move it or want to scrap it. But he said ultimately, if you look at the sales of that kind of merchandise, it was declining the whole time. So, but again, he could be telling the truth. That doesn't surprise me if that was the case.
I'm not necessarily going to defend Woolworths by any means because they're a shitty company through and through, but that's the case with most companies these days. But they have tons and tons of merchandise. Like, I think a lot of not even Argos, but just people right of centre have jumped to the immediately satisfying conclusion rather than considering this could have been primarily, but not solely, an economic decision of they're sick and tired of stocking tacky shit that sits on shelves for like maybe a week at the most. Some of it gets sold.
Yeah.
And then they've got to toss all this merchandise. From a waste perspective, I can understand that argument. But saying they're not going to stock anything at all and then loudly crowing about it's like, well, you deserve all the blowback you got. If they just quietly reduced the volume of how much they were stocking on shelves,
that's the thing. They didn't do this quietly.
So that they chose to make a big song and dance about this.
Yeah, they put out an official announcement. This was not done quietly.
Exactly. So they clearly wanted to try and I don't know the correct phrase we're supposed to use because virtue signaling is out. Because there's no virtue to be found here, but regime loyalty test is, too many syllables. So they clearly tried to dress up an economic decision as a social justice decision, and then they've copped a lot of shit for it. As a quick reference and a throwback to several years ago, do you remember when it was Brambles or the bakery store that said they're raising prices, but where they in an internal company memo, they said, blame the price rises on climate change, but we're just profit gouging at this point.
I don't remember
Baker's Delight or Brambles, one of those two things. They were basically caught trying to dress up an economic decision as a social justice decision. And then when the memo leaked, they obviously copped a lot of shit for this because they were rightly called out of, you're just raising prices to price gouge.
Yeah. I mean, when inflation goes up, generally the business lobby will blame unions for wages being too high and therefore putting extra pressure on inflation. So they will always, I think they do try to politicize the issue to their favor all the time. And that, is just one example of it. So look, talking about, I haven't had a look at who's won all of the Order of Australia awards, but I guess one good story to come out today is that the Australian of the Year award was actually awarded to two people this year. So they're both scientists who work on melanoma research. They have basically been credited, like their research has contributed to the saving of literally thousands of lives in Australia. So, what are their names? Okay, so because I did actually watch an Australian story on this guy, Richard ScoMo, and also his research partner Georgina Long. So, Richard ScoMo has actually got terminal brain cancer at the moment. He's 57 years old, and basically, he doesn't look like he's got much time left. But he's an amazingly positive guy when you see him. I don't know how he manages to keep, that high spirits, even though he's looking death right in the eye. But he did say that some of the ground that they broke on melanoma research could actually translate somewhat into brain cancer treatment. So he's actually using himself as a sort of guinea pig for that treatment, because he's like, well, I'm going to die soon anyway. You might as well test it out on me and see how it goes. I've got nothing to lose. So, yeah, I'm just glad that this wasn't some token diversity pick this year. They genuinely actually gave it to two individuals who deserve it, who've actually done a good thing. And, that's pretty rare. Like when they gave it to Kathy Freeman, she's an athlete. She's a runner. Why give it to her? It doesn't. Anyway, yeah.
We live in a society that worships actors and athletes as the highest moral paragons of virtue. There's no point
but
to be
also
made here, except to sort of point out, we hand these things out like they come out of freaking cereal boxes to regime propaganda agents. I'm not at all surprised. I am just jaded at this point, mostly because I can sort of accurately enough predict why they do certain things. It's no longer a real surprise.
Well, look, one thing, just to talk about, when they accepted the award, they were both talking about how, speaking about Hollywood, that they're putting out a dangerous message about tanning, that being the ideal image to present. Having a tan is good. Now, I'm not saying...
I'll agree with that.
Well, look, I'm kind of yes and no on this question. First of all, tanning is not obviously anti-white. You're going to retain your race. But there is some evidence to suggest that the whole slip, slap message actually worked a little bit too well. And that's because a lot of people end up with vitamin D deficiency. Because
I think you're conflating several things here. There's a difference between wanting to bronze oneself up, but I still think that's a road fraught with peril. It's just why? Okay, some people are pasty white. Goodness knows I was like that in my younger years, but that doesn't mean I should go overboard. Rather, it means I just need to go outside, touch some grass, and get 15 minutes of sunshine every day. The people who I see going too far with the tanning things, they wind up looking browner and browner. And I think definitely there is an element of internalized white guilt that comes from people who do tan themselves into, orange and brown hues. But I lament the fact that, historically speaking, white or fair skin was a sign of wealth and affluence, because it meant you didn't have to slave away under the hot sun for outdoors. So people aspired to have lighter colored skin. The fact that we've now inverted that without necessarily having done the work for it means that the tanning stuff is just another consumerist hobby. You're obtaining the tan without having done a hard day's yakka out in the field. Now, if you're a farmer who happens to, look a bit swarthy, it's well, okay, thank you for the cereal. Let me know if you need drought assistance. That's very different than some children of some rich cunts going to a tanning salon.
I guess. Now, look, they have actually banned those tanning beds in a lot of jurisdictions. I support that. That's definitely true. That's obviously an example of getting the tan without doing the work outside.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think, for example, when you go to the beach, a lot of people will put their sunscreen on before they've even left the house. You probably shouldn't do that. you should actually go to the beach and just for a few minutes, like no more than 10 minutes, don't put the sunscreen on because getting a bit of vitamin D is good for you. That's all.
Yeah, a little
Now,
bit of vitamin D.
I'm saying
is
they need to
needed.
find a middle ground.
Let's be sensible centrists about this.
Yeah.
Sure. I wasn't aware people. I mean, I wouldn't do that just from the practical elements of you put the sunscreen on, you're going to sweat that off into the clothes you're wearing, or even worse, onto the seat fabric of your car. And then the car's going to smell rank rather quickly if you keep doing that, where you have to wash the interior of the car more often. So to me, that's just wasteful stupidity. It's not that difficult to wait 15 minutes for the stuff to sink in. And even then, you can probably err a little on the cautious side. Err on the dangerous side and go, yeah, okay, I've smeared it all in. As long as there's nothing visible on the surface, you're more or less good to go at that point. I thought you were going to open with the, and I don't know how much truth to put to this, but the schizo right-wing medical take of sunscreen is bad for you because it's just chock full of chemicals. And one of our friends talked about how people in the Middle Ages did not get sun cancer. I can believe that to a certain extent, that if you are acclimatized to being outdoors all the time, you would build up a natural resistance of some measurable sort. But that was in a Northern European climate, and in particular Northern European UV exposures. I don't think in the 200 years we've been here, we have evolved to avoid sunburn as such. But I could believe there's some truth to that. And there's also some truth to the, what are they putting in the sunscreen ones? I can't remember which one it is, but I think it was like the zinc dioxide one is the best one if you can get a hold of that. Because if you do get sunburnt, you don't have that internal reflection shit that goes on where it traps the heat inside. I'm going to have to Google that now really quickly.
Yeah, look, I've heard that argument about sunscreen, but I wasn't going to open with that simply because I don't know enough about it to make it.
I'm just saying sound off in the comments if you do happen to know about this, but it was my understanding the zinc oxide ones are better, but only in the event that you do get sunburnt. Otherwise, the mineral sunscreens, they're effective, but it's like, if you're willing to sort of entertain these arguments, you're probably someone who thinks, oh no, I'm just going to smear myself in pig fat and then roll around in the outdoors.
Yeah, and I have noticed a lot of our guys have strong opinions on this topic, going both ways. It's one of the few issues that divide us in opinion. Okay. Oh, yeah, and just last thing about Australia Day as well. Just in time for it, we just hit the 27 million mark in terms of our population. It doesn't feel like that long ago. I read a story saying it was 25 million. So it's obviously accelerating. It is a huge rate. And, the annual growth in population is 41% larger than the previous record in 2009. All right. Obviously to do with the 600,000 people that we have let flood into the country in the past year. So this increase is not really being pushed by fertility. It's being pushed by importation of undesirables. So, yeah, but like we say, you didn't come here to listen to good news on this show.
No, you came here because this is the hurt locker. You come here to be exposed to the truth and grow stronger to it. The only offhand comments I'll make is that to our audience, I would say, are you aware that our government is into inflation porn?
Inflation porn?
Yeah, they're inflating the population of the country, watching it get bigger and bigger.
Of course they are. And I mean, that's been able to hide the negative growth rate in Australia by the Albanese government. They are supposed to be cutting this year's, the 2024 year's intake by 25%. And that's supposed to be an overall number. Like, it's not just fiddling with permanent residency or how much citizenship certificates we're giving out. It's supposed to be an overall cut. So it includes temporary migration as well. I think there will be a cut, but 25% is enormous. And the visa backlog that has already accumulated, that was there actually ever since the borders opened back up. I just can't see them doing that. But anyway, what is this all related to? It's related to the cost of living. And Albo had his caucus recalled to Canberra 2 weeks ahead of schedule. They were supposed to just come up back for the parliamentary sitting, but they're there 2 weeks earlier. And Albo is he's doing this media spectacle to make it known how seriously he's taking all of this. He really wants to do that. I read that, like, ever since he came back from his Christmas break, he's done like 40 odd interviews. He's smashing out all the media appearances. And yeah, rightly so, because people for a long time were thinking all this guy cares about is the voice, the Indigenous voice. Prime Minister's supposed to really focus on bread and butter issues, like how much money is in your pocket. That's what people actually care about. So, he says they're still developing the overall package on top of the existing policies. But of course, what everyone has been talking about the most is the changes to the Stage 3 tax cuts. So, these, as the name suggests, there were 3 stages of it. We've had 2. This was legislated by the Morrison government back in 2019, I believe. And Labor did go to the last election promising to pass the legislated Stage 3 tax cuts unaltered. So that was, apparently I heard Angus Taylor saying that those commitments were made by Albanese and Jim Chalmers at least 100 times during the campaign. So, you could say this is a broken promise or a modified promise, or whatever it is. But we're still getting tax cuts here. At face value, I don't know. I think this actually doesn't look too bad. So I'll just walk people through the basics of what we had here. So under the Morrison government, so if we got the original plan, the original Stage 3 tax cuts, what they were going to do was raise the highest tax bracket, which is 45%. They were going to make that apply to a higher income population. So anyone who's on $200,000 or more, they would be taxed at 45%, and then you go to the next bracket underneath that. So what's Albanese doing? Well, the top tax threshold will be lowered to $190,000. Okay, so if you say are earning $195K a year, well, unfortunately, you'll still be stuck in that 45% tax bracket. If this was under Morrison's old plan, well, you'd actually get a tax break. So, in other words, rich people are not getting the tax cut that Morrison promised them. All right?
Cool.
This is, look, this is a Labor package as well. You would kind of expect that, wouldn't you? That's how they like to tinker with the tax code. You have bigger tax breaks for those on lower and middle income, and you have smaller or no tax breaks or actually increasing taxes on the rich. So to go to the other end, that was there I was just talking about the top rate. To go to the bottom end, the tax-free threshold is going to be lifted to just over $19,000. So you will pay zero tax until you hit that amount. And then once you go over $190,000, you go into the very first income tax bracket, which is 16%, which obviously is way, way lower than 45%. I still got to say, like, the 45% bracket really does seem harsh to me, because that's basically half
Just
your money.
Half.
Yeah. Like, so if you're on 200K, you'll only get, what? My maths are awful, but not much more than 100K.
Yeah.
And that still strikes me as
excessive.
No. Is it the libertarian in me? I don't know, but forking over basically half your bloody pay seems excessive to me.
Especially when it's not going to your own people, as it were. Like, I think there could be not exactly a good argument, but a better argument than the current one could be made in the ethno state again, like every opinion of mine more or less has two takes. There's one for now, one for a hypothetical good future. But one would expect that in an idealized whites-only society, would you even need taxes to be that high? Like, you wouldn't have a net population, a population that is a net drain on the public purse. So there's still no good argument for taking that much. Certainly having limits on the acquisition of excessive private wealth as a safeguard to keep things shipshape and prevent outsiders from infiltrating, because I believe that was part of the reason why Jews were able to subvert stuff, is that they were able to accumulate enough wealth to then swing that around in ways that suited them. But taking half of a person's wealth, even when it's at the top end of town, it's like, what's that going towards, and why is this the only way we have of filling the public coffers with the money needed for all the things we want? Right. It is nothing more than a punitive, like, when the left says tax the rich, that to them tax just means punishment. So they're saying punish the rich. So it is a libertarian take at the end of the day, but every so often a broken libertarian occasionally measures reality in an accurate enough fashion.
Yeah, and well, look, if we kind of had our way, if you look at what third positionist governments have done in terms of federal revenue, they always seem to find that, well, protectionism, tariffs on imports coming in is one of the ways of raising a good amount of money without hurting people's bottom line. By the way, the United States did that as well. The vast majority of federal revenue, up until the introduction of the income tax and the Federal Reserve and all of that, was through tariffs. That's how they raise money. And
yes, they're taxing businesses without necessarily taxing individuals. Now, there's obviously ways that rich people can just get around that, where they pay themselves an exorbitant salary, but that's only someone who's economically illiterate would sort of think, oh, that's how they're going to get around it. Well, that means you've just robbed your own company of its operating capital. Like, you do have to sort of let the company use that money for something or other. So there's something to be said for that sort of stupid greed. But put myself on mute there by accident. There? Sorry. Yep, still there. Managed to wedge the button open. Now, I just quickly Googled it. I'm seeing different sources here, but they're saying that the top marginal tax rate for NSDAP Germany was 13.7%.
I've got it in front of me right now. It was the exact thing I was going to talk about.
And the tariffs, like, I think that's an excellent idea, where you tax
that's how they did. Yeah, that's how they were able to keep the income tax rate down that low, 13.7%, the top rate. I just mentioned that our first income tax bracket is 16%. So our lowest tax bracket is still higher than what it was in the Third Reich under the highest tax bracket.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I also like the idea that they're taxing merchant trade, because we all know sort of the running gag, merchants, but at the same time, merchants were people that became fabulously wealthy, and they were the original rootless cosmopolitans, and it was their influence that led to cities becoming proto-multicultural spots where you had lots of people from many different cultures coming together and generally acting degenerate. So frankly, it's a win-win to tax cross-border trade by saying, if you're coming here to flog your foreign wares, guess what? We're taking as much of a pound of flesh as we can. And hopefully you don't wind up with a mercantile class that then starts to get a bit above their station. So I think it's an idea that definitely should be on the books for any future third position government.
We might still have Holden, we might actually have been able to maintain our domestic manufacturing. Protectionism works. It's sound economic policy. And the one last thing, like significant thing, there's quite a few details on this, so we're not going to bore everyone with all the technical stuff here. But what is it? Oh, yeah. So under the Morrison changes, they were going to actually abolish the 37% tax bracket, which is the one right in the middle. And their Labor is retaining it. So it's still going to be there. But look, In terms of how much money people save, the average household is said to, and this is coming from the analysis, so this is not coming from like the government's advertising or anything. The average Australian household is said to save $804 a year, while those on the higher end either will just keep paying the taxes that they already were, or get a less. They'll get less tax money as they were promised under Scott Morrison. So they're the people who aren't happy about it. But yeah, I mean, look, if you are going after the people, you're on 200 grand or maybe more. Hell of a lot of them would be, the property classes. A lot of them are boomers, who own like bloody 3 properties each. They're the ones who always benefit from inflation, from interest rates going up and all that kind of stuff. It means more revenue for them. And it's no coincidence, I don't think, that even though so many people are doing it tough, all of those at the top end are actually doing better than what they were doing before. Because, like I said, they benefit from high interest rates, increasing rent prices and all of that. So if they miss out just a little bit under this package, I say so be it. Now, on that note, I would say actually that these changes will be popular, okay? Because obviously the vast majority of the Australian electorate is made up of low and middle income earners, people who earn over, I think it was 150 grand a year. There's only 1 million of them in Australia. I believe I read that somewhere. And remember, there's 27 million people here. So they're very much in a minority. Their vote doesn't really count as much when you consider their numbers. So the coalition has promised to unpick this. They won't, though. I mean, look, considering how much time will pass between now and whenever the coalition is re-elected, the economic climate would have changed enough that they can't just simply go back to what the changes were supposed to be as legislated all the way back in 2019. I can't see how they would do that. Nonetheless, they have said that this was a massive election promise being broken. It is deceit by the government, and that will work to unpick it. Well, yeah, good luck with that. We'll see what happens. I mean, they still could be elected in the next term at the 2025 election. Wouldn't actually surprise me if they were. So the Greens, now they would of course support this. In fact, they'd support going much further with all of this. But there's already rumblings now, and Maureen Faruqi in the Senate has already suggested that they're going to be looking for more. They're going to say, if you want us to pass these laws in the Senate, where the Greens obviously have quite a few numbers, well, you're going to have to put some sweeteners in there for us. And look, I don't think I read anything specific, but we know that the Greens like to do things, they've chosen as their economic policy of choice rent and housing. So they're going to want to see some increased subsidies, maybe even rent controls, as they had been pressuring the government into before. So, yeah, it'll be interesting now to see kind of the negotiations that go on. Remember, these laws have not been passed yet. This was simply announced yesterday by the recalled caucus. They'll get the numbers through the House, of course. In the Senate, like I said, they've got to get the Greens on board. And so far, the only crossbencher in the Senate who has said that he does support these changes to Stage 3 tax laws is David Pocock. That's it. So we haven't heard anything yet from the likes of Jackie Lambie and the rest. So we'll wait and see. Okay, so in terms of grocery prices, which are fucking horrific, I hate going shopping, and I hate going shopping even more now when I see my receipt at the end of the day.
I just hate seeing all the freaking diversity. That's really
so
the biggest off-putting part. But yeah, the grocery receipt is, I've noticed that I'm having to sort of upwardly revise my budget expectations for how much I'm spending on food each week, where some days I'll buy 5 or 6 items and that's close to $50, and it's not like any of these are $10. Some of them kind of are, depending on what it is I'm getting, but that alone shows that things are getting more expensive in real time. And I've seen a lot of people comment about this online, where it's psychologically damaging, according to them, to see items that they once knew were like $1 or $2 now be cost something like $5. And it's nice to know at the bare minimum that the common people out there, I'm trying to avoid saying the word normies because I think that's an overused phrase, the common person out there is noticing and remembering. And again, these are people roughly within our age demographic, as in, under 40 or thereabouts, sort of remembering, 20 years ago, these things were fewer units of currency, and these days there's more units of currency required for exactly the same product. And people are noticing and sort of wondering, why does any of this have to happen? And a comment I made on Twitter, which is just a throwaway one, of I've yet to see anyone explain to me why we need inflation in any way, shape, or form. And I still haven't heard a very compelling or convincing argument. The worst arguments I've heard of, we keep having a growing population, therefore we have to have more units of currency. And I think that's almost a self-detonating argument. It's like, well, what if we didn't have an exploding population? And the typical retort I've heard to that is, if we don't grow, our economy goes backwards. I'm like, what do you mean?
No.
Like, why does the economy need to grow by 2% each year? Why does the fact that we need 2% growth in order to not have a recession, like, what's wrong with 0% growth? I mean, we're talking about growth here. As long as things don't go hard backwards, I'd say we're all right. But there's this bullshit economic argument of we need to grow 2% each year just to maintain where we are. I'm like, that's fucking insane, because 2% compound interest over 10 years results in a doubling of the original quantity. I think that's the basis of most logarithms. But just stop and think about the fact that, 2% inflation over 10 years basically means you've doubled the cost of things for whatever it is you happen to be measuring. I find that absolutely insane. And it does strain one's sanity when you sort of get to the point of wondering, am I the only one that notices this? So, of course, for me, it was personally satisfying to see other people are sort of starting to catch on to this phenomenon.
Yeah, and one of the things that annoys me is also grocery prices, as say opposed to junk food prices, have gone up so much more. So we're still incentivized not to buy the healthy stuff because it's easier to just buy a pack of lollies that you don't have to cook or prepare, but it's actually cheaper as well.
I know, and that's just a moral failing in every regard that we allow things like that to happen.
Yeah. So in Queensland, there has been an inquiry called Parliamentary Inquiry into grocery prices. Now, new Premier here, Stephen Miles, has suggested that price gouging might actually be an issue here, where they just all of a sudden bump up the prices of items that are necessities and there's a shortage. So, yeah, I'm sure I can see how that would be contributing in some way. And so companies like Coles, Woolworths and Aldi are going to actually have to front a parliamentary state inquiry in Queensland. Now, at the federal level, we've got something similar. We've got old Craig Emerson, the former Labor minister, coming back to draw up recommendations on that. I believe that report is due in only a week or so that'll be interesting. And that also was mainly on grocery prices. So there's a cost of living inquiry, but it's mainly looking at grocery prices. So, well, just quickly also, just in terms of illustrating how tough it is for some people, the amount of rebates that you could get on Medicare for seeing a psychologist, those were halved not too long ago, about a year ago. And you used to be able to get 20 rebates. So you could actually have 20 appointments with a psychologist in a year, and you would get a Medicare rebate, which, sometimes that means you just get it for free. So if you find a psychologist who works for the rebate, well, that's it. That's actually all they get paid, and you get that session completely free. But anyway, last year that was taken from 20 to 10. And, well, according to this story in the ABC, that actually means that a lot of people who need to regularly access a psychologist simply are not doing it. They use up 10 sessions during that year very, very quickly because, they're kind of recommended to go and see a psych every week or whatever it might be. And once they've run out of that, well, then they start having to budget, which means sometimes not even going at all. So what do I think there? Should they put back the 20 rebates? I don't know. This is a secondary solution. And the primary problem here is just the sick society we live in. You're not going to fix it with appointments with a shrink. You're not going to do that. You need to find ways.
The worst things that's come out of modernity is this obsession. I see women talking about how they're only interested in dating men who regularly go to therapy. It's like, well, there's nothing. It is to be commended if you attempt to heal thyself in this age of illness and sickness, but there is something to be said for the mechanism to be employed. Men don't go to therapy. We go to the pub and have a cold one with the boys, and you discuss all manner of things. Like, that's how men are supposed to, what's the phrase I'm looking at, deal with their mental health. We don't have mental health issues, but at the same time, you become more mentally recuperate from time spent with the boys in a male-only environment. One of the downsides is we have the hermeneutics of gay suspicion as a way of preventing us from forming that. If you hang out with your male friends at least once every month, that's your manna bun. Like, that's what you're supposed to be doing. But this idea of, talking to a liberal until you agree with them while you lie down on a couch, that isn't going to do shit for your mental well-being.
Yeah. I mean, it might, but nowhere near as much as just simply being social. And yeah, I mean, I know it can be hard, but, if you're not part of a group of nationalists, you should try to get vetted if you can. If you spend enough time lurking online and talking to the right people, you can eventually, get something happening.
Don't be afraid to be the first one to say, hey, do we want to meet up? I mean, there's a lot to be said for how and where you locate people. Twitter is certainly not a, quote, safe location. It's not a trustworthy location to find people to meet up with online, but it is a chicken and the egg problem of how do you bootstrap a sense of your own community. And that's, I don't know if I've even got the ability to try and do anything about that, but it is kind of difficult at this point. So it's not, I understand we're asking quite a lot of some of the audience who, if you are sort of the only guy in your particular town or suburb, it can be a bit daunting. Hopefully we'll have a solution for that going forward. If you are on a TRS pay, we'll try and reach out to the vetting thing and see if they can bounce you to someone in Australia to put you in contact with other people. But at the same time, don't be afraid to meet up in meet space with people you've met up with online. But obviously don't do it at the drop of a hat. And some two-way vetting is required if you're sort of, just a bunch of strangers meeting up versus are you actually reaching out to someone who's trying to do stuff IRL? Because obviously we have to be on guard against Antifa types pretending to be us, although you can usually sniff them out as being weirdos one way or the other. But hopefully there'll be something we can do going forward about that. But goodness knows I'm unequal to that task.
Yeah, but do it if you can. It's always hard with authorities watching you and everything, and Antifa imposters as well. And yes, they do lurk in those circles. It's unfortunate, but yeah. But at the end of the day, you got to take some risk, and you got to get out there, man. Connect with some people. All right, let's move on to housing. Now, last week we talked about how the government, the federal government, is not going to meet its target of new houses being built in Australia. I can't remember the numbers now. It was over 1 million. But the reason why is actually not because of the typical, cost blowouts and delays and everything that Labor-driven infrastructure programs very often yield. It's actually the simple fact that builders are going out of business. So even if you do have the funds available and the workforce and everything to get a project started, well, you got to actually have a builder who's willing to take on the project. And that's just not happening. There's a building site that I live next to. I live near it. And it was actually supposed to be finished in February last year. They only now have started to work on the foundations of it. And I was told, same thing, they just couldn't find a builder. Or there was a builder that was contracted to do it, and then they went bust. So we're seeing a similar thing in New South Wales. So under Chris Minns' target, it was going to be a total of 75,000 new houses built for the year of 2024. So Chris Minns has, I'm glad he got in early here and said, well, I'm not glad, but, Labor governments often lie about, how long certain projects are going to be. Take, for example, Metronet here in WA. They're saying 18 months. Bullshit. It's going to go at least 3 years. But Chris Minns actually did admit, well, they're not going to meet the target. Even though we're still in January, beginning of the year, he still said, no, we're not going to make it. So they're blaming the former government for the crisis here. The planning minister is anyway, Paul Scully. No, this is just one of those examples where, like, everyone is to blame. It's a crime that everyone has their fingerprints on. Okay, you can make that argument about a former government, but this is an immigration-driven problem, and that blame lies in Canberra, and it lies with both parties. It lies with the Coalition and Labor, who have been contributing to this. Not to mention the fact that we've been covering up GDP numbers for so long with an accelerated population that we perhaps have not ripped the Band-Aid off in time. And we're going to finally see that, yes, we are in a recession because of all these builders going bust. And then at that point, it's going to be even worse. We're going to enter a technical recession. Investors are going to fucking lose their minds and pull out their funds. And all of this will just go to shit. We'll see all of these empty building sites and all of these houses that were supposed to be built, even though you've got people lining up everywhere to move into a house or buy a new house or go and rent a new place. We're going to have all of these empty projects littered across the country. And it's going to be very sad. Very sad. Yeah, you said you don't like going shopping because of the diversity. It's even worse in a department store. Like grocery shopping is one thing, but when you go to, a big shopping center, that's the worst.
Bad everywhere.
Seeing them triggers me, but, because of all this stuff now, like I know some people who are having a very, very hard time finding a rental property. And they've been telling me that every time they go to like an inspection, it's just full of fucking Indians the whole time, And that is such a triggering thing. Like, I just kind of think, wow, like, you don't belong here. And not only do you not belong here, but you're driving up all of my prices. You know? You are making everything expensive for me, even though you have absolutely no place in this country, in this society whatsoever. And that is an extremely annoying, agitating thing for people to have to hold on to. And yes, that does contribute to racial tension. It might even boil over. I think that is a healthy instinct. You should have that resentment of others. I know, harsh way of putting it. Call me a dirty racist, but
that's what we're here for, isn't it? No, I don't have anything to add to that.
that's right. The last story, we only had 2 on housing this week, was, still in New South Wales. The New South Wales Building Commission, which is just the regulator in New South Wales, they have been conducting studies, site surveys across the state, mainly into apartment buildings, because we know how much Sydney-siders love their apartments, thanks to high-rise Harry Triggerboff. And what they found is that 53% of apartments, that is new apartments registered from 2016 to 2022, have at least one serious defect. Okay? So that is all the new apartment complexes from 2016 that have been built. Over half of them have at least one serious defect. Third world conditions.
Third world, yeah. Third world safety standards, third world standards in general, I should say.
I remember, Nolsey likes to always point out that your civil engineers are increasingly being replaced with Pajeeps.
Who cheated on the test using ChatGPT, I might add.
Yes, definitely. But also, they get degrees from often just totally bogus universities in India. And thanks to the free trade agreement that we recently signed with India, we recognize those degrees now. It used to be a case where that degree meant nothing and they had to just go and drive an Uber. But now we actually recognize it as a genuine qualification, and therefore they can go in and work these jobs. And a Pajeet surveying your building is a very, very bad idea. And when I read this, I just think, okay, this is one of those classic marks of a civilization in decay because of the dilution of the original ethnic makeup. We are becoming more and more like India and other countries all the time. And industrial accidents are going to become the norm, like they are over there. In places like India and Bangladesh, if a mine just fucking collapses and kills 100 people, that barely makes the news. Whereas when we had the Beaconsfield mine collapse, one person died in that. And you might remember that was national news for months. We're heading down the third world road where these kind of incidents actually become common. And that's very sad. All right. So let's move over to the Israel and Gaza conflict. So, doing a general overview, I believe that the death toll is over 25,000 now. Around half are children. Pretty much all of them are civilians. They've been pushed into the lower part of Gaza, approaching on the Egyptian border. Now that they've collected them in that little part, they've started bombing areas that they previously said they were not going to bomb. They wouldn't dare lie to them, would they? And also, our Foreign Minister Penny Wong has just wrapped up her little trip over there. So we covered the Israel part of it last week. Since then, she has gone to the West Bank. Of course, there's no way she was going to do a visit to Gaza. You'd have to be crazy to do that right now. And she recommitted Australia's support for the two-state solution. As we know, Bibi has said, no, that's like putting terrorists among us. So even though Likud previously did support the two-state solution, or at least officially, behind closed doors, I don't think they ever supported it. And same with, I guess what you could call left parties as well, like the Labour Party in Israel. What they say in public is very, very different to what they say in private. And I basically think that there's bipartisan opposition to the two-state solution. They want a continuous occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and they eventually just want to annex at least a third of the West Bank, which they effectively have done through settlements. Anyway, there's about 700,000 people living in the occupied territories in the West Bank. And that's not going to be too long where they just that whole area just officially becomes part of Israel. And she wrapped up stuff in the United Arab Emirates on Thursday. Those talks, I think, were just much more to do with trade and whatnot. But, yeah. Her little tour has come to an end. And Sky News is basically saying she shouldn't have gone to the West Bank at all. Instead of going there to meet people from the Palestinian Authority, she should have gone to the places that Hamas attacked on October 7. And, that basically makes her a Nazbol anti-Semite, the fact that she didn't go there. Even though she spent about a week beforehand talking to the family of hostages taken and victims on the October 7 massacre, terrorist attack, as they like to call it. It was basically a guerrilla war operation that went well. It was highly effective. So, on the two-state solution, I think, it was last week we covered this, maverick Labour MP called Julian Hill. He's not very well known because he's just a backbencher who I believe was recently elected. But he's just saying that it is a disgrace that the two-state solution has been effectively abandoned, has been taken out of political discourse in Israel. And he's saying that Penny Wong isn't going far enough with that message. He wants her to actually publicly rebuke Bibi and talk about how he is setting the clock backwards in this regard. This is the guy who also said that he wanted to make it illegal to fund Israeli operations. And he wanted to know what a lot of Israeli charities or Jewish charities, where they're actually putting their money. Sometimes, they say that they're just feeding the hungry or whatever. But really what they're doing is funding the IDF. And he's right. I mean, Jews wouldn't misappropriate funds, would they? So the Australian is loving covering this guy because they're trying to kind of paint him as like the new radical anti-Semite face of the Labor Party, while the coalition does everything they possibly can to cuck for the Israelis. All right. So, we did have a recent announcement that went kind of under the radar, actually. I only kind of came across this because I read Australian Jewish News, which I recommend our listeners do go and read. And this was on sanctions that are going to be imposed on individuals and groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. So these are economic sanctions. Before this happened, I should just point out that there was an article in The Australian that was where they did an interview with what they refer to as the country's most prominent Holocaust survivor. Sorry, one of the country's most prominent Holocaust survivors. So this is a woman who is saying
weird
that
fucking phrase.
It
Like,
is.
oh yeah, here's one they couldn't kill. It's like, okay. Yeah, I think that should be the response whenever people talk about the Holocaust. You say, oh, don't you know 6 million Jews were killed, or this is the one who survived us. You just look at them with put on your best fluoride eyes, stare, and say, what am I supposed to do with this information? Just refuse to follow the NP script of blowficating about how bad it's like, millions of Jews were killed. Okay, and?
Right. I wish we could bring back the Echo meme in, wasn't that a Chrome extension, I believe? Notice those coincidences. Anyway, so this woman, she was complaining about how the government has been continuously delaying designating the title of terrorist to particular groups. And also, as the Australian pointed out, the Albanese government failed to formally designate the October 7 attack as a terrorist act. So we never made it official. And this Holocaust survivor says that puts out the message that Jews don't matter. Well, unfortunately, you do matter a lot to the government. And they do everything they possibly can to bring you on board. But also, I don't think the government has actually done that formally yet. But as I said, there were all these sanctions here. So these include Hamas and Hezbollah leaders, financial facilitators, and people who have provided training to terrorists. So basically, it is illegal for anyone to do business with them or hand over any money or assets to them. And the maximum penalty for doing that is actually 10 years in jail and or heavy fines. So I imagine tens of thousands of dollars. And of course, the Australian Israel and Jewish Affairs Council, AJAC, instantly put out a statement approving it, saying that it is a welcome move. So even though this woman will tell you, this delay puts out the message that Jews don't matter, they always seem to get their way in the end, don't they?
Yeah. 10 years, hey. Well, if nothing else, they're having to choose power over legitimacy. And while that's bad in the short term, and no, I'm not making an accelerationist argument, but forcing world Jewry to just flagrantly expose itself, it's a necessary step, but it's insufficient in the broader context, is what I want to say. As in, we have to do more. We have to be ready to present an alternative, but that's a long way away. But making the enemy expose themselves is doing some of the dirty work for us. So grateful for
they're
that.
running a terrible public relations campaign right now. Israel and just the diaspora Jewish population. Their optics are awful right now, and when they're worried about like the uptick in anti-Semitism, while I would say there's no violent threat, I would say they're right. A lot of people are actually recognizing the Jewish question and coming to conclusions that they find scary.
They don't like,
yeah.
And that's got to be the best thing for us, is that again, like, I'm rehashing old shit here, but I'm able to just hold my nose whenever I see the Palestinian protesters talk about how there's a common struggle between the Abos and the Palestinians in terms of overthrowing white world supremacy, because as far as I'm concerned, the anti-Semitism that's a more pressing topic to develop, because once you've at least got people to understand Jews exist, you're sort of half of the way there towards getting them to at least stop being so virulently anti-white. That's never going to go away for the non-whites. Of course, they're always going to be jealous, but just getting people to understand, hey, why is it that this one time we're protesting against what they think is white supremacy and nothing is happening? Because we've got the magic answer that unlocks the puzzle box to say, well, the reason why your protests are doing nothing is that you're not protesting white people, you're protesting Jews, and that's why you can scream and shout as much as you want in the streets, nothing's going to change. And of course, some people just are never going to cotton on to that fact, but when it's not our responsibility to quote save everyone, end quote.
Yeah. Right. So talking about the protests a bit here. So the government has been accused of failing to tackle the issue of pro-Palestinian activist teachers, is how the Australian words it. And there was a Melbourne school teacher who openly endorsed October 7, said it was a good thing that Hamas did that to Israel. And the Australian points out that he may still be teaching. They haven't actually sacked this guy yet.
Fucking who?
Right. And you've also got over in Victoria, this is, what is this? teachers group. Some teachers group. I'll just bring it up quickly. Oh yeah, Teachers for Palestine, and they're holding a public forum. They already have. This was on the 22nd of January at Victorian Trades Hall. And this was to do with what they say was actually political pressure. So coming from mainly the Victorian state government to exercise neutrality on the Israel-Palestine question. So this forum, if you have a look at the ad that they put out for this, it says, Teachers for Palestine Forum, why there's no neutrality on genocide. So they're basically saying that, like, I guess it's so obvious that Israel is in the wrong here that that should be pointed out. It's hard for me to disagree with that. You know, it really is hard for me to see how you could actually look at this and say that the indiscriminate bombing of the second most densely populated strip of land in the world that has so far resulted in 25,000 people dead, about half children, how you could actually deem that or to be, well, we just need to look at the nuances here and take a completely neutral approach. I get that. But look, they wouldn't have this problem in the first place if, like, they didn't always hire activist teachers. You know, it's been going on for so long in the West.
Yeah, that's
teachers. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the funny part is that it's just enough to point out to Jews that this is the bed they have made for themselves in many, many ways. And all we have to do is just point and laugh at them at this point and say, yeah, guess what? You cunts have brought this upon yourselves. Like, they've been hiring these activist types for some considerable time, and now it's all caught up with them where, as I've said previously, as others have said previously, their leftist programming is misfiring and attacking Jews. And I think the important thing that needs to go out amongst anyone who's right of center, so obviously I would hope most white nationalists understand this, but like your dissident right types and CivNat types, they need to be told this will not result in a rollback of DEI or CRT or any of those anti-white things. Yeah, DEI will still exist, but the I will be changed from inclusion to Israel. So it's diversity, equity, and Israel. Like, Jews will simply demand a carve-out exception for the Jews in every which way. But of course, that's fraught with danger because then they're going to have to openly declare themselves as being Jewish, which has historically never turned out well for them. But I just want to sort of front run that idea and say, listen, they're still going to be hiring radical academics, but they're going to be ones that will be handpicked to ensure they are as Zionist as the day is long.
Right. It's a Jewish golem that they've created. Pushing for mass immigration. Well, then those people start to actually come over here, organize politically, and then they say, you know what, we actually don't really like Jews very much.
Yeah,
and
so
that's what they have to
They're not
deal
going to
with.
get rid of the DEI stuff. They're just going to make sure the DEI stuff has an unprincipled exemption for Jews.
Yeah, and that pretty much entirely explains, I believe, what is the shift of Jews going from like the radical left to the neoconservative right. You know, you've been seeing that trend in America for a very long time. I think it started even earlier here in Australia because Jews have actually typically voted with the Liberal Party. That might just be for the sake of money. You know, they like the tax cuts because they tend to live in electorates like Wentworth. But yeah, they're just sort of they see the neoconservative right as more friendly to them and therefore better for Jews. Because remember, that's really what Jewish disagreement is all about. If two Jews disagree on something, they still actually agree on the first principle, which is it good for the Jews? They want whatever system, whatever ideology is good for the Jews, but they differ on what exactly that is. Watch the debate with Alan Dershowitz and Dennis Prager if you want to get more of an idea on that.
Here, watch the Zionist news source. Sorry, not a jab at you, of course.
What was it? Oh, yeah. And so talking about the protests. So we have some figures here. Now, granted, this did come from Sky News, so I don't know how accurate this is, but ever since October 7, we've pretty much had a demonstration every Saturday or Sunday since. And yeah, we've had, I don't know if we've had every weekend here in Perth, but we've certainly had a lot. But apparently, the amount of money that has to go into extra wages for New South Wales police is costing the taxpayer $220,000 every week. So,
sort of ties back to our earlier conversation about marginal tax rates. It's like, why are we paying higher tax rates? So the police can have more recruits to protect Jews in Australia. It's fucking unreal. Sorry, do go on.
No, sorry, I was told I should stop doing that, making drinking sounds so obviously in the mic, and there I am like.
No, you should definitely. I mean, I got to ask. Probably should ask it off there, but is my mouth breathing not coming through or no?
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine today.
Good. Using a different microphone.
Yeah, because you used to you lived up to that nerd stereotype of like the heavy.
I'm so embarrassed. Oh dear.
But not today. So yeah, the right, if they're also just looking at this from an economic perspective now, because they're always complaining about these protests, like every week on Sky News. But yeah, they're continuing. For example, the ports in Melbourne, where they're still trying to disrupt the shipment of cargo by Zim, which is a freighting company that's said to give supplies to the IDF. And yeah, they're doing this every week. They're getting out there on jet skis and trying to disrupt. They're trying to, harass them and just skirting the borders of law breaking. And sometimes they do go too far, and a lot of these arrests have actually been made. Okay, now just the last thing on Israel. This did not really make the news. This is another one of those very kind of quiet stories here. So I guess I have to unfortunately say credit to the ABC who did write an article on this. But this was an agreement that was signed between the Victorian state government, Labor government, and Israel's Ministry of Defense. It was signed a year ago, and it was signed in secret, which is why we've only just started to hear about it. So this agreement was one to collaborate on projects and foster trade relations. The arrangement has actually recently been listed on the government's Foreign Arrangements Scheme Register, but the contents of it, the detail, is not made public. So I don't even think if you filed an FOI. Yeah. So, no, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to. Oh yeah. So they reckon this is to do with like strategic partnerships in manufacturing. How can we actually cooperate economically to come up with new manufactured capabilities? So it says it aims to identify projects that can deliver advanced manufacturing capabilities and highly skilled jobs for Victoria. Now, I should point out here that no other state government has a partnership with sovereign defence bodies that have been publicly listed. So this is the first one ever. And yeah, I'm just looking at this thinking there has to be more to this. Why are they keeping this secret, this agreement?
I can jump in a quick bit with what I think is the correct shot on all of this. Firstly, we have to remember the broader conflict in Gaza, Israel at the moment, where the Israeli nation has had to draw down upon their reserves of fighting age men for the war effort on their part. And this has had a very large economic hit on them. So I'm obviously wholesale stealing this take from TRS because that's where I heard it from. This is having an economic impact on Israel in obviously very negative terms, because when you take a whole bunch of your workforce away and have them, put away for 3 months. It's been more than 3 months by about now, coming up to 4 months. That obviously is going to have a net drag effect on the productive output of your economy. So Israel's economy is suffering quite badly because of this war. It's not being well publicized because only policy wonks would sort of care about such things, and everyone's more concerned, rightly so, about the humanitarian impact on the Palestinian people. But obviously this is making the diaspora Jews quite nervous because, while there may be the factionalism that we are by now very aware of between the Jignats and the Optics Kikes, they do still have that ethnic loyalty component. So what we're seeing is some Jews in the West are trying to prop up Israel back at home by various investment opportunities. So you can sort of see where I'm going with this now, where I believe it was on what would be for us yesterday's show, TRWOE, the TDS people talked about how Bill Ackman, some US Jew, was directing investments in such a way as to basically funnel money to Israel in such a way as to prop up their ailing nation state. So with that in mind, when you showed me this article this morning before the show started, that Victoria signed this thing for manufacturing possibilities, the way I interpret that is this is just Jewry inside Australia trying to prop up the Israeli economy by any means necessary. Now, there is perhaps some truth to the fact that they may have been looking at doing this prior to October 7th. But
I was going to say, we have to remember this was actually signed 1 year ago.
Yeah, okay. I still reckon that's part of the story here. Is there? I mean, that's the other thing, is that Israel can't actually survive in its own right. We've been having to prop up the state of Israel since it was started. So I don't necessarily consider that as being detracting from my overall point. And quite frankly, we should therefore expect to see Jews ramp up such efforts where they signed these one-sided trade agreements or manufacturing agreements as a consequence of the economic hit that Israel is taking. So I think the point that I'm making still stands, that this is Jews in the West basically funneling money back to their shitty little nation on the edge of the ocean there.
Right. Yeah. So I always just look at this and say, all right, if there's any kind of agreement going on between one Jewish group and one Gentile group, if you want to boil it down and make it that simple, usually you find that it's to the benefit of the Jews and the detriment of the Gentiles. And the fact that they did this in secret and they are still not publicizing the contents of it is very, very fishy, to say the least. Okay, now on to issues of free speech. Still in New South Wales, we are going to get, this was announced last Friday, that there's a review into hate speech in New South Wales. So this review is examining Section 93Z of the state's criminal code, or the Crimes Act, I should say. It's not quite a code, which obviously pertains to hate speech. What is it that actually constitutes hate speech? Now, Jewish groups have been pushing New South Wales police to arrest a number of demonstrators who were chanting things like "kill the Jews, gas the Jews." I'm quoting here. I'm not saying this myself. And then there were legal debates that followed after that, where, for example, I read one lawyer who was talking about this Section 93Z, and he basically said, if you say "fuck the Jews," that's fine, but if you say "gas the Jews" or "kill the Jews," well, that's inciting violence. And so therefore that is not acceptable either. However, there's still differing a legal opinion going on. So what do you do then? Well, they've obviously lobbied the Minns government to say, all right, well, look, if these laws are ambiguous, make them unambiguous. Give them some teeth. So I can't see any other outcome happening here. They are going to amend this section, or they're going to remove it and replace it with something else of the State's Crime Act. And they're basically going to make a lot of these slogans, maybe even from the river to the sea, constitute a form of hate speech or incitement. And therefore you'll, cop a heavy fine or maybe even get a jail term out of it. Yeah. But as it stands right now, the Jewish lobby does not like the chances of prosecuting people under this section. And yeah, it hasn't happened. As far as I know, those ones who turned up at the Sydney Opera House rally, who were supposedly yelling out all that stuff, I don't think any of them have been arrested and prosecuted under 93Z. So we'll wait and see what happens with that.
Yeah, they're having to choose retaining hard power over retaining legitimacy. So, see my previous comments. I just find it funny that we have Section 93Z of the which exact body of law, corpus of law, does that relate to?
That's the New South Wales Crimes Act.
Oh, right. So it's not a federal one. Yeah. So I was just sort of thinking to myself, like, well, we've got Section 18Z. I'm thinking, does that mean we're all going to start talking about Section 93Z? So 18C and 93Z.
Yeah, 18C is federal. That's the Commonwealth Racial Discrimination Act. But yeah, I mean, and well, important to point out here, Jews are taking a multi-pronged approach. They're not just going for, the banning of arm angles and symbols at the federal level. They're doing it at the state level as well. So remember, Mark Dreyfus actually said that he originally was not going to include the banning of symbols and gestures under federal law, because he said, well, that's a state police issue and that's up to the states and territories. And then what happened? We find out, no, they are putting those in there, and they are. Go have a look at the legislation, which has passed. It's there. And remember, guys, don't start sending digital swastikas, okay?
Yes.
Not that I have any problem with it at all.
Be smart and don't make it easy for them to put you away into a prison.
Yeah, don't give them a reason. Yeah, so look, the Australian that I'm reading this stuff from about New South Wales hate laws, I think that in a way, while they do want to emphasize what they say is the rising tide of anti-Semitism, at the same time, they don't really want you to think that Jews are responsible for these laws, or these laws becoming more harsher. Because the next article we're going to go through is this one from New South Wales's diversity community. So this was, I'm just trying to find the name of, I'm not sure if it is an organized body, but anyway, the state's leading religious figures, so those from Buddhism, from Islam, from everything you can think of, and not just Jews, are saying that they welcome this review of 93Z, because they feel that free speech is too often utilized to, say, denigrate their religion as well. So this is the Australian kind of saying, hey, look, it's not just Jews who want these laws. It's all of these other religious bodies too. Well, I can't remember the last time I heard about some Buddhist leader in New South Wales talking about how this section of the Crimes Act needs to be amended. I did not hear a fucking peep out of anyone until those demonstrations at the Opera House. So I'm sorry, Murdoch Media, I'm not sold on this. You may have been able to get a couple of quotes. For example, who was this guy? So one of the people who did speak to the Australian about the review into 93Z, Dr. James Riffy. So he's a Lebanese-born Australian, and he represents, of course, the Muslim community in Sydney. And he said that the current laws are not worth the paper they're printed on. Okay. This is one of those optics Muslims, I think.
Yeah. Now, there's... I mean, I have nothing to say because I'm fairly certain I've made my views on this already present, that, enemy of my enemy is a temporary ally, but the emphasis on the word temporary in case anyone's starting to get uncomfortable by that idea. But the optics Muslims... I just call them degenerates, to be honest. Like, that they deliberately moved to a haram country So it's sort of like you've got to wonder, to how deep is their faith would be the way I would attack, how I would verbally spar with these people. Sorry, is what I want to say.
Yeah, well, the extremists will tell you that the world belongs to Allah. I remember that's how that guy in the UK, Andrew Chowdhury, worded it, who was just like a professional shit stirrer, that guy. A lot of these, self-proclaimed Muslim clerics, they're just there to, anger people. They do it on purpose. They're shitlords, in a way. And, he lives off the dole and just always talks about implementing Sharia in the UK.
I mean, I know it's veering well into the topic of the counter-jihad stuff, but I find it to be true enough to say that Islam is the lazy sandman's religion. I mean, just the phrase "inshallah" means "in God's own time," which is a phrase they use when they just want to hand wave away responsibility. I mean, this is in their personal day-to-day lives, from what I remember from my I'll just say exposure to their culture without doxing myself. But I've had exposure to Middle Eastern culture, and that was certainly one of the more interesting takeaways, is the extent to which the Arab cultures it's very much a desert-centric religion, in the sense that they're just lazy. They're lazy little shits at the end of the day. They do just want to sit around, smoke shisha, and make the intonations towards being a pious, faithful follower of Allah. So
yeah, I mean,
that these guys, sit around and collect welfare and talk, we need to implement Sharia laws. We have we white nationalists have a knee-jerk reaction of Sharia law, but it's this is a phrase I've heard do the rounds quite a bit, and I've often been fond of using it. You look someone dead in the eyes, especially when they're a normie, and you say, Islam is a sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic religion. Take a deep breath. But they also have some bad ideas, like banning pork, banning beer,
right.
and they're not very nice to dogs. What you got to press these people and say, what does Sharia law mean to you? It's like, if you say, the thing I don't like about Sharia law is I can't have a bacon sandwich and a cold pint of beer while I pat a dog. What does Sharia law mean to these people who say, we need to have a Sharia law in Australia? It's like, we want to put clothes covering on women and throw gays off rooftops. You go, okay, what's so bad about that? What? Again, you can have a lot of fun with that, so do enjoy. But the whole point of asking these people, what is it about Sharia law that you think is missing from Australia right now? I'd imagine most of them don't have a solid answer above and beyond, everyone must submit to Allah. And again, you just say, what am I supposed to do with this information? You use that tact of, okay, let's say we submit to Allah, what next? Let's say I put on the little skull cap. We all wear dresses. Our women are covered from head to toe, which frankly at this point would be a frigging improvement. Yeah, only a husband should see his wife in a state of undress. I'm no fan of the gays, as I'm sure every listener of this show is. Foreign policy, death to Israel. So what else is there that is? It's the pork, the alcohol, and the dogs. That's my only complaints with Sharia law. I mean, sure, there's the whole, it's not a Christian. Well, Christianity, I'm not even going to touch that one, but let's just say it's, push these people to sort of elaborate on what they mean by Sharia law. Because the only other good one that I've heard, again, I would imagine most of these Islamic agitators wouldn't even be aware of this one. You say, okay, what about the economic policies of Sharia law? We're going to ban interest on loans? Because I'm 100% for
later,
that.
actually.
Yeah. What's so bad about banning usury? So, what else is there to Sharia law that is, because it is still an Abrahamic religion at the end of the day. They have, insulting Jesus Christ is considered blasphemy in certain Arab countries and other Muslim countries, because and again, I'm not trying to be weird about it, but it is important to recognize that Prophet Muhammad did regard Jesus Christ as a messenger of God, maybe not the son of God, but they do regard him as a religious figure who is allegedly would be protected under anti-blasphemy laws. So that's something to think about. Whereas, under the alleged Judeo-Christian shared values, you can blaspheme as long as you want, as long as you don't insult the Judeo part.
Yeah. Well, look, the other point that I wanted to make here in terms of the Australian emphasizing, not just the Jewish community, everyone else, is saying, it's not just Jews, it's Muslims, it's Christians, it's Buddhists, whatever. The Australian typically would never actually write an article like that because they don't generally speaking, they don't like the idea of importing blasphemy laws or laws just generally that stifle freedom of speech, like the freedom to, for example, draw a cartoon of Muhammad. In fact, a lot of those normally conservative types will actively encourage you to do it because
I fucking hate that shit.
Of that right.
I don't want to pick a fight with our Christian listeners, but I would actually say Christianity would be a hell of a lot more based if they did push for anti-Christian blasphemy laws, because I dare say that shitty free speech argument of, in the West you're allowed to defile images of Christ and so forth. And I think, you know what? I don't want to live in a society that tolerates that shit, because again, that's just a gateway drug to further degeneracy.
Yeah. But also,
my key point is I hate that conservatives hold up free speech as, look at how free we are. It's like, okay, where's my freedom to criticize the Holocaust and the Jews? Notice how all of those types would shrivel up. They would be shrinking violets if you said, can I have pictures that show Jews being dunked into a vat of boiling oil or something like that? They're more than happy for it to go one way, but when you actually attack blasphemy, what's the phrase that's doing the rounds at the moment? The system is what it does. You can blaspheme against Christian religion, but you cannot blaspheme against Israel or the Jews at this exact moment in time. Like, that is very much the in vogue thing of, oh no, you can't say this. Like, where's my fucking freedom of speech for that shit?
That is why the Australian, for example, is now supporting these kind of laws. So, as I said before, when they used to be, say, encouraging people to draw cartoons of Muhammad so that you're expressly exercising that right and also showing opposition to blasphemy laws, hate speech laws, etc. Now that they're in a position where the so-called hate speech is being directed towards Jews,
they want
now they are changing their position. And not only that, but also pointing out all of these other religious groups that, well, we actually previously attacked them for advocating stifling our free speech. Well, actually, no, now we like them. Now we like them because hate speech is targeting Jews. Therefore, we can actually all unite over our support of outlawing hate speech. Right? It's a joke. It's
fucking beyond acceptability of. I'm just repeating myself at this point because I'm angry. It's like, no, if free speech doesn't exist unless I can publicly deny the Holocaust and not suffer criminal charges for it. I mean, I know that's kind of the case right now, but let's be honest. If you get any kind of punishment or pushback, it's not free. And even then, the concept of free speech is such a fucking time waste. Like, every society bans speech it disagrees with in some form or another. This idea of you should be allowed to have absolute free speech is libertarian nonsense taken to a zenith extreme.
Of course, we have libel laws, incitement laws, sexual harassment is illegal, things like that.
Of all the dumb American ideas, free speech has got to be the worst. And even understood in context, it's not as bad, but it's still sort of, the Americans want they wanted freedom of speech as a way of, we want to criticize the government, which at their point in time was simply the British Empire. But you could imagine conservatives of that ilk, or the whatever you call them, whatever the equivalent was, the rightoids of that age were like, no, how dare you criticize the empire? We can't have this. Let's draw pictures of Indian gods. And if I had the ability to fact check and research that, I'd probably find evidence for that, I would expect. But no, this idea of you want free speech, it's only as a way of overthrowing the current regime. Like, I'm sick and tired of hiding behind that. It's like, yeah, absolutely, there would be fucking speech bans in the ethno state, and top of that list, from my personal biases, would be pornography.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd also encourage all our listeners, delete your porn collection, honestly. Hopefully you don't have any
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just going to agree and amplify. There's no
so-
good reason. I don't think any of us would have a pornography collection as such. Like, I think I'd like to believe all of our listeners are upstanding members of the white nationalist community. It's like you sort of understand. Yeah, there's no need for such things.
No, there's not. Okay. So, look, one other story on the topic of free speech. Now, this is one that I had been neglecting to cover, but when I saw this article come up on Australian Jewish News, I was like, okay, we definitely got to cover this now. So, there was, I should say, an employee of the ABC. I might be saying her name wrong, but Antoinette Lattouf. She is a Lebanese Australian woman. She's a Muslim. She, as you can imagine, is advocating for the Palestinian cause at the moment, and she was actually sacked from the ABC. So, just at the outset, I want to say I don't really like this woman. You can actually go on YouTube and find a TED talk that she did on microaggressions and that kind of shit. So, I don't really want to defend her in that regard. But she is currently suing the ABC, her old employer. So what happened was, because, we've just come out of the summer break, she was filling in for one of the ABC News hosts who was on holiday, and she was supposed to be there for 5 days. Now, she only did 3 days in the end. And then she was sacked. She was only employed casually, and she got sacked. So what actually happened here? Well, she shared an article coming from Human Rights Watch. So Human Rights Watch and Amnesty are the main kind of human rights organizations that operate and document the whole situation in Palestine. And Human Rights Watch claimed that starvation was being used as a weapon of war in the current conflict in Gaza. Hard to kind of disagree with that, I think. Now, previously, there had been an article written on the ABC News website that said that very same thing, that starvation was being used as a weapon of war. So a lot of people are saying, well, hold on a minute, why did this woman get targeted then if the ABC themselves had written an article from it? Well, some people are saying because of the fact that she showed the primary source. Instead of actually going to the ABC News article, she showed the primary source, which is the Human Rights Watch, sorry. But still, I don't really understand why that would be a reason for sacking her. Well, we've gotten some more information on what really happened. And what really happened has nothing to do with what she is alleging. I should point out that in suing the ABC for unfair dismissal, she's actually saying that she was sacked not only for her beliefs, but also because of her race. That's right. This is another person actually accusing the ABC of racism. As we know, ABC staff did that walkout when Stan Grant said he was a constant target of racial vilification. So,
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so look, apparently there's been several meetings about this. And yes, some ABC staff still think that there is some kind of entrenched systemic culture of racism within the ABC. It's amazing. And this woman is just serving to further that. But anyway, what actually happened here? How did she just get sacked for showing one article 3 days into a 5-day stint? Okay, well, here's what happened. A particular group was involved, and they are called Lawyers for Israel. All right. Now, it's not an official group, there's no membership. In fact, how they organize is actually just with a big WhatsApp group. All right. Now, this is a group that not only targeted this woman and what she said, but they've been targeting everything they possibly can, okay, as they do. But it turns out, so the texts were obtained by the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age back on January 16, that, just quoting here, a high-level and coordinated letter-writing campaign from pro-Israel lobbyists. So this was directed to the ABC chair, which is Ida Buttrose, And there were messages like between these people talking about it. So I'll just read this exchange here. So it said, I understand that she, that is Latouf, will be gone from morning radio on Friday. So that was the ECAJ deputy, I believe, Robert Goot. And then the lawyer from this group, this WhatsApp group, Lawyers for Israel, responded by saying, and dismissed from the ABC altogether. Friday is 3 days away. Too long. And then he went on and said, the more complaints, the better. So this woman was set to be fired in 3 days' time from whenever that message was exchanged. And this lawyer in that group said, that's too long away, 3 days. So obviously they were vying for this woman's scalp. They just wanted her crucified. And so, I mean, I don't know if this is ignorance or naivety on her behalf or whatever, but you stupid woman, can't you see that this had nothing to do with anti-Arab racism or anything of the kind? In fact, there's a very good chance that you were a diversity hire. In other words, you may have actually gotten the job precisely because you're not white. That's not it at all. The reason you lost your job is because you were targeted by Jews. Plain and simple. That's all it was. And this could actually serve to be a really, really good public relations campaign against organised Jewry in Australia. But now we're completely missing the point because she wants to talk about racism, white racism against poor old coloured people. So it's not entirely lost on everyone, though. This group, Lawyers for Israel, have actually received a number of emails and private messages through WhatsApp when they figured out that they were the ones responsible. So, for example, we have in an email, you racist bunch of genocidal cunts hiding behind a veil. The chickens have come home to roost, pieces of shit. They were also referred to as one lawyer was referred to as a Jewish rodent, and that they would be hung from a bridge very soon. So, it's not lost on everyone.
You love to see it.
Yeah. So obviously there are some people out there who know that this is clearly, there's Jewish fingerprints all over it. Yes. Okay. So just quickly on race power. Yes, we do actually have a section in our Constitution. It's under 51, Section 51, that permits the Commonwealth government to make particular laws concerning different ethnic groups. And, this is actually the section of the Constitution we voted on in 1967. Most people think this is when we gave Aborigines voting rights. No, they already had voting rights. What this meant was, under Section 51, under the race power, it actually specifically named Aboriginal people and said the Commonwealth can't make any laws pertaining to them. Only the states can. So we went to a referendum in 1967 to add Aborigines to that section, Section 51, and therefore the Commonwealth could then go and make laws and, create all those wonderful Indigenous bodies that suck up public funds every year. That was the result of that referendum. Anyway, James Paterson, who is a Liberal senator, he has said, well, we just need to abolish that section now. It doesn't matter. If you abolish that section, that just means that the Commonwealth could still go on funding the same programs and everything. So I don't get it. You don't, even though the Constitution doesn't have to specifically recognize your right to pass legislation for the purpose of affecting particular ethnic groups, doesn't mean you couldn't do it if that section was taken out. So, and by the way, to take it out, you'd have to go to a referendum. So why on earth would you want to spend close to $500 million on a referendum over a constitutional change that would make no difference? It's a stupid thing for him to say.
Yeah, well, that's one misuse of our tax dollars, but
yeah.
No, having seen and listened to you read all of that, it dawns on me this is just conservatives arguing about the separation of power or separation of responsibilities between state and federal level. Is my grokked understanding of this on the mark?
Yeah, well, yeah, the race power is entirely Commonwealth.
Yeah. So, store a tempest in a teacup, or whatever the drinking apparatus. So, yeah, storm in a goon bag.
Yeah.
Or tempest
All
in a
right,
goon
well,
bag.
here's I guess one little tiny white pill for you. There's a visa class that has just been abolished, and this is the Business Innovation and Investment Visa, subclass 888. Precisely one too many eights there. But this has just been known as basically the Chinese millionaire visa. So the actual fee, if you look this up, right, it's on the Home Affairs website. If you look up the actual application cost for this visa, it is over $3 million. All right. Most visa applications will cost you about $3,000. This, I'm not joking, was $3 million. So it was there to encourage, supposedly, innovation and investment in Australia. And most of the people who were using it were Chinese oligarchs. And very often, these were people who had run afoul of the law in China and were just on the run. So they would just buy this very expensive visa to come to Australia and stay here basically as fugitives. Because you know what they do to white-collar criminals in China? They just fucking kill them.
Shoot them. And they charge the family for the cost of the bullet in certain
That's right. They do.
circumstances.
Now, to be fair, they'd have plenty of money to pay for it. But yeah, that quirk. But for a long time, I thought that was a joke. But no, it's a real thing. Actually charge you the cost of the bullets. But yeah, look, what the Australian called the visa industry, basically that just means like migration lawyers and agents. They are up in arms about this because that was such a lucrative one. You know, if you got hired to do up one of those 888 visa applications, you would have got a bloody good fee out of that. So, but that's another reason to like this. Okay. Climate and energy. So here in WA, you have to have a certain amount of gas put away. That's kind of like a rainy day fund, which we definitely need considering today's climate environment. And we also have a ban on gas produced onshore from being exported. However, there has been an exemption given that is a plant backed by the billionaire Kerry Stokes, media billionaire. So there is a fear now that we're going to start giving those exemptions out further. This is just kind of the beginning of it. And we might get to a stage where we're exporting the majority of our gas, like a lot of countries do, making money off it, but then failing to have an adequate domestic supply that, of course, in turn is just going to push our gas prices up. So hopefully this is not going any further than this one plant. Let's go through. Some of these climate stories are a little boring, and I'm going to skip a couple of them. Right, so there is sort of we have covered this before, but when the federal government stepped in to stop the expansion in the port of Hastings, the wind farm that was going to be established there offshore, Tanya Plibersek, as environment minister, had vetoed this. This was a state decision, but then the federal minister vetoed it, saying that it would harm wetlands and marine wildlife and birds as well, who fly into the turbine, which does happen a lot. And the ABC just kind of asked this question, like in this article. If you read the very first line of it, it says, should you be able to hurt the environment to save it? Right? Because on the one hand, you had people saying, you know, we need to fight climate change, so we absolutely need to expand wind turbines and use green energy. But at the same time, you've got environmentalists saying, well, you're going to kill a lot of animals or disturb their habitats. So it's just that's another tightrope that they're trying to walk at the moment. And a lot of people are actually calling for the overhaul of federal law in this regard because they don't like Tanya Plibersek's decision. And basically they want to make it so that even if it does harm part of the natural habitat, you should still be able to do it if it results in a significant reduction of carbon emissions. So, yeah.
That's got to be the real nightmare condition for a lot of lefties is the care-harm axis is sort of how their morality is ruled, where it's always you've got first do no harm even in the extreme, which is ridiculous because it means they've constantly hamstrung themselves into thinking, oh, we can't cause any harm at all. But then you give them a lifeboat scenario like this of, well, in order to help the environment, we have to slightly harm it. Now, I'm not saying that wind farms are good. I am saying that from their perspective, in order to increase the amount of, quote, green energy, it's going to involve damage to the local flora and fauna in various manners. I suppose it'd be a vicarious thought just to be a fly on the wall and watch them sort of quibble and deliberate over how they would square this circle, because in their eyes, it's something they want to do, but is the cost too great? I mean, that's kind of what a lot of shitlib media boils down to, is like, would you dare to do these actions in order to pursue a good goal? And most of them sort of fail their own shit test of, no, I'd much rather, not do anything. So that would be quite funny.
Yeah, but I mean, the debate on this issue has certainly not ceased. It's getting more heated, in fact, and watching the left eat itself is always fun. Okay, so on to industrial relations. We still don't really have any update on the dispute between the Maritime Union and DP World, which is the freighting company. The government is still sort of taking the side of the union. So Tony Burke, who's the IR minister, said that DP World is focused on a media strategy instead of negotiations in good faith. Yeah, because DP World have actually been putting out paid ads to kind of, talk about how they're supposedly in the right with all of this. So, this dispute's going to keep going like well into the year, I think. Okay. Now, believe it or not, there is a bit of an alliance being formed between unions and employer groups, business bodies. And that is on the issue of payroll tax. Now, payroll tax, I've always said, I've found it to be the stupidest form of tax ever. You're literally being taxed for keeping a payroll, for employing people. And,
that's just pants on head retarded.
It is. And, as we all know, if you subsidize something, you get more of it. If you tax something, you get less of it. So why would you want to tax employing people? It just makes no sense. It's a ridiculous tax. And even the unions are saying, well, okay, while we ordinarily like big taxes on big companies, this particular tax actually disincentivizes them to hire more of our members. So it's silly. Unfortunately, though, they're not outright talking about abolishing it. They're just talking about reviewing and reforming it. I think they should go a step further and just say, no, it's a ridiculous tax. Get rid of it. So just some figures on Australia's casual workforce. That is people who do not have statutory employee rights like sick pay, holiday pay, all that stuff. So a study that was done, this was done by the ACTU, Australian Council of Trade Unions. So I don't know. Think of that what you will. It might be a little bit biased. But anyway, they found that less than 5% of more than 550,000 long-term casual workers in Australia who wanted to shift to permanent employment were able to do so. Only 5%. And the union points out that the vast majority of these people are basically full-time workers. In other words, they do full-time hours. It's a regular job. Sometimes they do more than full-time hours. But, like I said, they don't get those statutory rights there. And it's clear why those employers want to just keep them as casuals. You're in a precarious position. You can fire them at any point in time. But they also don't have to pay all of the regular worker benefits to them, despite the fact that they work full-time and they want to move into officially being classed as a permanent full-time employee. But only 5% in the last year have been able to do that. So, yeah, another reason why, we do need to overhaul things, because our labour market has changed a lot in the past couple of years.
Europe.
All right, so on to Aboriginal news. In Victoria. So the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria, this is sort of like Victoria's voice for treaty negotiations. So it's not one of those advisory boards. It's specifically about negotiating treaty agreements between the state government and various Aboriginal tribes. Well, guess what? The opposition, which is the Liberal Party over there, no longer supports treaty negotiations. Now, again, this, I believe, has to be the result of the no vote in the referendum we recently had. Because we've gone through other examples before where all of a sudden people would push back against various Aboriginal policy impositions because they suddenly felt confident enough to do so. Remember that Peter Dutton actually promised a second referendum on The Voice? And then as soon as he saw the results, how many people had actually voted no, he's like, oh, wait, on second thoughts, no, we don't support that. We want that out of the way. Similar kind of stuff has happened in Queensland, in the Northern Territory, and now we can see it's even happening in Victoria. Now, what I hate about this, though, is that the Shadow Aboriginal Affairs Minister, let me just quickly have a look, Peter Walsh. Was it Peter Walsh? Yes, it is. And he's also the national leader. So he's not admitting that, though. He's not admitting that, the Australian public generally started to oppose all of these various Aboriginal policies at the referendum. He won't admit that. He says that he's actually concerned about the cultural heritage studies that are done on plots of land that are due for development. So he's just talking about the red tape aspect to it, okay? He's talking economics again. Because, that is part of the treaty negotiations is also like, oh, you want to develop on my sacred site? Well, we have to do an evaluation of that first, and then you have to pay us X amount of money to keep the evil spirits away from it. And that's not even really hyperbole, what I'm using there. That's the basic process of it. So, okay, he's right. That is bullshit, all of that stuff here. But why is it that the Liberal Party previously supported all of this stuff? Did you not know that back then? That this led to increased costs on development? Why is it all of a sudden now, you, the quite possibly the cuckiest branch of the Liberal Party in the country, supported it all that time, and now, only a couple of months after the referendum, you oppose it? I don't think that is a coincidence. I think they see the changing tide, or perhaps it's not changing, it's just that, a lot of people were afraid to talk about their opposition to all these Aboriginal policies. But it found expression in the thumping no vote that we had. So in the Northern Territory, on the other hand, they are reviving plans for the treaty. So they actually disbanded the Treaty Commission office back in 2022. But hey, I don't know, maybe it's because they've still got a Labor government over there. They're announcing that it's back on again. So, yeah, in the Northern Territory, it's still going. Okay. So Julian Leitzer, who is one of the Jewish architects of The Voice, now on the back bench, of course, because he had to basically go there. His position as Attorney General was untenable, given that his position on The Voice was at odds with the official position of the Liberal Party. He has formally backed our next Governor General being of Aboriginal extraction. So among the people that have been named as possibilities here were Patrick Dodson, soon to retire from the Senate, Tom Calmer, Ken Wyatt, and Marcia Langdon. Can anyone imagine Marcia Langdon as our Attorney General? My God, that angry, sour-faced bitch. There is no way that would work. Then you've got, on the other hand, Jacinta Price, the absolute Aboriginal darling of the right. She's saying, no, this position should not be decided on race. It should be decided on merit. Very typical normally conservative talking points right there. Well, Jacinta, I hate to tell you this, but you were selected for your job on the basis of race. Just like Linda Burney was, and just like Ken Wyatt was. All pointed to Indigenous affairs. You were all put there for your skin colour, for your race. Even though you're not a full-blooded, because you've got a lot more brains than your mum, you were definitely a token diversity hire, no matter how much you want to deny it. And if you think otherwise, why don't you actually support the abolition of your portfolio? Why is there a separate portfolio, a separate ministry, all for Indigenous affairs? And you're the boss of that. Well, at least in opposition politics you are. Oppose that. Get rid of that. Okay. So, well, quickly again, we already sort of touched on, the indoctrination going on in schools. And anyone who's been to an Australian public school knows that it's a real thing. They're talking about here the indoctrination of kids as young as those in kindergarten being told that Australia Day is evil, that we are sitting on stolen land, and they start every day with an acknowledgement of country. These are little kids.
I have nothing legal to say at this point in time.
Well, again, I'm going to say that this stuff has been going on for years, and everyone was basically just too afraid to talk about it. The no vote winning in the referendum has brought topics like this out of taboo territory, and you actually can start talking about it. Because a lot of people are talking about getting rid of, acknowledgement to countries in the workplace. A lot of places have to start every fucking meeting with an acknowledgement of country. People started properly pushing back on that after the referendum. So it's good that people are at least talking about it, talking about the indoctrination into all this left-wing bollocks that you have in the school. All right. All right, let's move on to national security here. So they've actually laid sanctions on a single individual who they have identified as behind the Medibank cyber attack that happened, a little over a year ago now. So if you forget, that was where they got the personal information of around 9.7 million people who are, obviously clients of Medibank. And that information in various forms was distributed on the dark web. So this guy, his name is Alexander Imarkov. And yes, you might have guessed, he is said to be a Russian hacker because all of these cyber attacks are done by Russians. So economic
sanctions. I'd love
sanctions,
to see some actual proof over this.
Yeah, I haven't looked into that. Yeah, how they came to this conclusion, I don't know. But look, all this means is like that. Obviously, They haven't put out an Interpol arrest warrant or anything. But if you give this guy money or transfer any assets to him in any way or do business with him, that's illegal. That's just what economic sanctions mean when you place them on individuals. So that's how we have dealt with supposedly the man responsible for this cyber attack. Come on, Kaiba, you're a computer nerd. You must have something.
I'm just skim reading. No, my point remains. I'm just skim reading the articles. I'm just going. There's no evidence that the ASD or the AFP have put forward to justify the accusation here, and I think that's the sticking point that needs to be made here. And obviously, anyone who's been paying attention should be able to look at this and say this appears to be a politically motivated sanction action against Russia, a nation that we are ostensibly in a proxy war with. Why should any of this be believed at face value? Is all I would say to anyone who makes a noise over this. Yes, the Russians do have
whenever there's a cyber attack, whenever we get a cyber attack, the knee-jerk reaction is always to say Russian hackers before there's even been an investigation. Why do we do that?
I think there is some truth to the fact that the Russians do engage in an awful lot of cybercrime, but I wouldn't say it's state sanctioned from the perspective of the Russian government, but they just choose not to enforce it because it's a form of asymmetric retaliation against the West. So I'm just going to victim blame us and say, yeah, if we treated the Russians a little less awfully, maybe the Russian government would be more interested in enforcing international crime conventions, standards and norms of what's acceptable and what's not, because there is some truth, from what I understand, to the fact that the Russian government turns a blind eye to some hacking operations when they target nothing but Western outfits. So you have to sort of look at this in the broader context of why are the Russians allowing this to go? And say, well, because we keep acting like dicks to them. So it's not that I'm victim blaming the Metabank customers who have been affected by this, only that you want to be angry at someone, be angry at the Australian government for having deliberately soured relations with Russia. Because I think there's a long tail of consequences that is now catching up with us. And I think, as it says in the article there, will these sanctions have any meaningful impact? No, they won't. So this is nothing more than the office cat ladies of the regime thinking they can cancel someone's bank account in order to bring them into heel. And as the 2-year mark for the Russia invasion of Ukraine has shown us, Western sanctions are increasingly toothless.
Yeah, and I mean, on the effectiveness of it, how many Australians were actually doing business with this guy? Probably close to none.
And I would imagine those that are doing business with this particular individual probably have offshore bank accounts that they can then indirectly transfer money to him. So they'll get around the sanctions of this one individual with comparative ease. Like, this is not, you can't make PayPal donations to your favorite Russian wares releasing scene. Like, no, this guy's, he's dealing in millions of dollars here. He's going to have more sophisticated banking services available to him. And this is, like I said, that was the first thing I wanted to find out from the article, and there's no information there. How's the AFP identified this? One guy was behind this attack. I'd almost not believe that, in the sense that there was probably I wouldn't say a dedicated team, but there would had to have been one or more individuals working the angle of getting into Metabank to successfully pull this data heist off.
Right. Yeah. That did stand out to me as well. It's like, I thought they were at least going to point the finger as some kind of organized network, but instead,
if they said several individuals in a Russian cybercrime group have been fingered as being responsible or partly responsible for this, that would be infinitely more believable. But just for them to say, "Oh, we've identified the lone Russian hacker who did all of this," I'm extremely skeptical of those claims.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll just quickly move on to by-elections. We've got 2 coming up at the federal level now. The first one So this sort of came up when we were on our break, I believe. But the seat of Dunkley, which is a Victorian seat, it's a marginal seat, so it could go either way. Labor did win it in the last election, but its member has actually passed away. So this was Peter Murphy, PETA, so the female Peter. She was in this seat that she won with a significant swing towards Labor, and she died of breast cancer. So that's sad. I'm not going to dance on her grave. I may not like her political points of view, but nonetheless, this will have to be, as whenever a federal government does have a by-election, it's taken to be sort of like a microcosmic evaluation of the federal government. So it's more than a by-election. It's more than just what's happening in that electorate. So traditionally speaking, though, remember this, governments always lose by-elections. Well, they always lose them in marginal seats anyway. So, yeah, basically, if you're in government, you want to avoid by-elections if you can. You really want to avoid them. Now, the other one is, the seat of Cook. ScoMo is leaving politics. So, he's actually going to like some lobby group that Mike Pompeo is a part of. So no doubt he's got much better paying jobs and business ventures to look forward to. And, well, this is the safe seat of Cook. So that's going to go to the Liberals no matter what. That won't look so bad for Labor because, everyone will be expecting him to lose that one anyway. So, yeah. And I don't really have any parting words for ScoMo, really. I don't love or hate him any more or less than pretty much any prime minister in the last 50 years. So, yeah, just indifferent. Okay, now on to AI. So the Science Minister, Ed Husic, has been talking about laws needing to catch up to all the sudden, rapid developments in AI software. But when I was reading this, I wasn't even going to include this in the prep because we all know this kind of stuff. But when he was specifically talking about programs like ChatGPT being able to just kind of spit out information in an instant, he said this: the big thing I'm concerned about is not that the robots will take over, but that disinformation does. And as you can probably tell, whenever a politician uses the term disinformation and talks about the government's need to fight it, you should be extremely skeptical about what's going on. Now, I know that this just he's referring to just AI here. But what does that mean? I mean, we often talk about how we need to regulate technology in order to make sure it's not racist. As we know, Google's facial recognition technology turned out to be quite racist by identifying Africans as gorillas. Also, you used to be able to do things like type in criminal in Google Images, and more often than not, you get a bunch of violent black guys who had mugshots taken. That's all changed now. So you can go and change the algorithms to make them less racist and everything. I just want to know, what has Ed Husic got in store here for overhauling laws to do with AI? I suspect it's stuff like that, making sure there aren't any racist algorithms.
Yeah, racist algorithms. I reckon they're also just butthurt that potential disinformation would come in the form of propaganda images produced by our side, as well as anyone who's broadly against the system. Just the fact that people can now easily manufacture agitprop to push a message of their own desires. Not to pick on them directly, but I could imagine the anti-vax crew would have a lot of fun with just having artistic freedom to come up with all the various scenarios that they're personally worried about, and being able to have systems that will generate near enough photorealistic images of politicians in various states of enforcing, COVID tyranny or lockdown. Like, I think that's what they're most worried about. There's also the unspoken thing of producing black flag propaganda material. Like, you just produce I don't even want to say the acronym, but it's really bad images of politicians in various states of compromise, because I could see that kind of stuff flooding the zones and just causing chaos and mayhem. I'm seeing some reports or some instances of students in schools using AI generated nudes or deep fakes of classmates and tormenting one another with that. And that's just I don't know how you stop that without just banning computers in total. And that's...
I know. But I was going to say that stuff is fucking horrible. Like, I don't mind laws against that. I mean, the whole issue of cyberbullying, particularly for teenage girls, is extremely distressing. And, it causes suicide. It causes a lot of them to kill themselves.
So there's definitely cause for concern there. But the disinformation comment, it doesn't quite apply to AI, at least in any way that I'm immediately seeing, because what the ruling regime considers disinformation is simply the truth. So I think they're more worried that people will use AI systems to present the truth as we understand it in a way that is compelling and engaging, and they're worried about losing the propaganda war. They're definitely losing the attention span of a non-trivial percentage of the population, not a majority just yet, but it's enough that it's making them nervous that people are no longer trusting of the government, and frankly, there's no reason for anyone to trust this government. So that's where I see the concern having its origin.
I would also say that those companies who are producing the type of AI that Ed Husick is talking about, they're self-regulating anyway. I mean, anyone who has used ChatGPT, try and ask it, what are like the levels of black crime versus white crime. Good luck getting an honest answer out of ChatGPT with that.
Yeah.
Okay, they've already self-regulated to that point that the government wouldn't even need to step in because, they've self-regulated.
Yep.
All right.
So wait and watch for that one is all I can say at this point, because I'm sort of scratching my head going, we're kind of already doing these things, but I don't consider it like we're already propagating the truth. I don't see that as how that's going to be enhanced by silly AI images. Like, they're probably just trying to crack down on our shit posts, but that's I think it's just hysterical hair on fire reaction of, oh God, we're talking about things they don't want us to talk about.
Right. Okay, well, we'll just get through some shorter stories so that Kyber and I can go off for Oz Day celebrations today.
Yep.
So we covered last week how there was calls for Australia to donate its retired fleet of Taipan helicopters to the war effort in Ukraine because they're retired. It means we're not going to use them anymore, and they're just destined for the scrap heap now. Well, we're not giving them to them. I don't know why, but for some reason, no, those choppers are just headed to the scrap heap. They're going to be dismantled and disposed of. We can't give them to the Ukraine. Tony Abbott has come out and expressed his disgust over that and saying that we lost an opportunity for Kiev in its struggle against Russia. So I don't care. But I am interested into why we didn't actually donate them, considering we are officially on the Ukrainian side. I don't know. All right, let's talk a little bit about consent laws. So talking about, oh God, this is the Commonwealth Consent Policy Framework. All right, so these are basically guidelines. They're not laws or anything like that, but they have been developed to, provide guidelines for people in the workplace and in the home, and they're looking for the kind of behaviors or attitudes that drive violence against women. And one of the findings here, one of the things that the guidelines attempt to tackle is having male-dominated institutions. So they say that male-dominated institutions can reinforce, support, or excuse attitudes or behaviors that are supportive of violence against women. So if you
this is what gives men mental health issues. The way we're talked about in this context would be a way I would use to sort of put a spanner in the wrench of any conversation like this, of, you know, talking about male dominated or male centric or just male only organizations. If you've been around, I mean, it doesn't bear saying to any of our audience because we sort of take it for granted, but when guys are on their own, I don't actually see that much conversation about women that is like truly denigrating or derogatory. Like, sure, you crack a few jokes, but it's more like, you know, harmless diatribes. But that's the takeaway I see from this, is that they're just simply looking for more ways to make sure there are no male-only spaces or spaces where men aren't being henpecked to death by women.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'd point out, just one quick point, is if this was a topic that came up within earshot of me, I'd just turn around and say to them, okay, so you're trying to enforce these consent laws with regards to women. Define what a woman is for me. I know it's a total conservative boomer take at this point, but again, you're not going to convince hearts and minds where someone's already dead set on doing this shit, so the best you can do is just disrupt and be antagonistic.
That is one of the very few conservative trolls that I think is actually effective, just saying what is a woman, because they just can't answer that question. And it was done by Alex Antic. He asked, I think it was the guy from the ABC, like, what is a woman? And he couldn't give an answer. So, well, look, these, the policy framework, as it's called, is saying that male-dominated institutions must challenge harmful misconceptions that drive sexual violence. So, the idea that drinking alcohol or wearing particular clothing can signal consent to sex or excuse someone from assuming consent. All right, now, this framework also defines what consent is. So, a free, voluntary, and informed agreement between people to participate in a sexual act. This agreement is only present when these people mutually and genuinely want to engage in that sexual act and actively ensure their partner does too. Okay, at least there's nothing in there about like affirmative direct consent, you know, where you have to like verbalize, like, yes, I am consenting to this act. But notice the use of the word informed. So it's an informed agreement. Like, you could really play around with that and say, oh, I thought this guy, what if he lied about what job he had or something? I don't know. It seems kind of stupid.
It's just meant to fuck up intrasexual relationships between men and women. Like that.
It is.
That's all the consent stuff was ever meant to do, and I think overanalyzing it is.
Right.
What is this? 2014. We're talking about consent laws.
Yeah. So look, these are, as I said, just policy frameworks. These are not set in stone. That is like recommendations that the Commonwealth gives to people. But at the state level, we know that these laws have actually been already passed in Tasmania and in New South Wales. They do have like affirmative consent laws, meaning you're supposed to give a direct response to whether or not you consent. So you could verbalize it or you could write it down, which is fucking stupid. Anyway, Queensland is now going to be passing these laws too. And the Queensland Law Society said that attempts to adopt these laws could actually lead to the criminalization of spontaneous sex, which is what the vast majority of sex is, isn't it? You know, you just like
thereabouts.
You go with the flow. You know, it starts off with you know, kissing or something, and it just kind of keeps going and going. And if the other person doesn't object to it, well, you're pretty safe to imply consent, right? As long as they're not drunk or whatever, you know. That's the way it always works. And how many women actually want you to ask the question? Doesn't it actually spoil the mood?
Yeah,
you know.
Like I said, the overanalyzing above and beyond, this is just meant to put an impediment on relationship formation amongst white people. Is sort of missing. You're missing the forest for the trees, I think, if you try and delve too deeply into these things. it's just enough to say, that it's feminists wanting to make sure that only hot men hit on them, which is, more of a fantasy than pretty much every other fantasy I could think of off the top of my head right now.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm glad, lawyers are usually pretty posed, but they're actually, making the point here that not only could it criminalize spontaneous sex, but it also misused in divorce cases. Women wouldn't do that, would they?
No, it's nonsense. So,
So there's been a 13% increase in human trafficking levels and in the last financial year, 2022 to 23. So by far the most common form of human trafficking is forced marriages. Now, Australia actually did not adopt any laws concerning forced marriages, that is, making it illegal, until 2013. You want to know why? Because prior to that, there was basically no such thing. No, it wasn't here. We imported this from other countries that do have that practice, just like they do things like female circumcision. And yes, we've had like botched, like DIY operations at home that have just resulted in infant girls dying. We never had any of this stuff before. So now not only do we have to make sure that it's illegal, but we have to actively fight it because it's now happening as a common occurrence.
I'd be worried that some of these Islamic preachers and all the other types that practice this would say, "Oh, this is what we need Sharia law in Australia for: is forced marriages and female genital mutilation." Like those are, I just can't wrap my head around how any man with a straight face could say either of those two things are beneficial in any way.
Right. Okay, so yeah, we'll do this one as the last story, and this is talking about Muslims again. I think you were talking about Islamic banking before,
this. I'm just skim reading the notes here. I'm of two minds about this particular story, so I'll take the lead on this if you don't mind. Islamic clerics are lobbying the federal government to axe the quote sinful end quote indexation of university loans for Muslim students, which is currently
is that usury? They're talking about indexation, moving with the inflation rate. That's
creative. Yeah, because that's a really good way of muddying the waters, because I don't actually know which way to even think about this, because is inflation a form of usury? Because it's I don't know, like that's a really hard one to nitpick on, because on principle I dislike the idea of them getting a carve out just for themselves unless it gets applied to all Australian students. I'm not a cruel conservative. I mean, I'm not a conservative, period, but I dislike the idea of being spiteful about loan forgiveness, because it crushes our guys as well, and it fucks up family formation for people who are neither left nor right, as in they're just unreconstructed normies. So I think the industry built by the universities in squeezing every last red cent out of students and young adults is wrong. But trying to tie indexation or CPI price rises to loans via making that considered usury, that's some creative interpretation on their part. But then again, I think the way it's written in Islamic law, in the Quran or whichever document it is that has all of this, they don't necessarily use only the word usury. It's do not profit off money, like do nothing, don't profit off. It's forbidden to they have it written in that archaic script where it's like, it comes out as like ancient medieval English or something like that, where it is forbidden to earn money when you have done no labor for it. So in that in that perspective, those clerics are probably interpreting their own scripture as being, this is a form of monetary profit without effort. And, for all my ranting about monetary inflation, I'm sort of hard pressed to immediately disagree with this and go, I just worry that it's, what are the follow-on consequences of, say, supporting this? Because I'm not quite sure how else this could be interpreted, because Yeah, I just don't know what the...
Well, what would absolutely happen is that anyone who is paying back, it's called HELP now, isn't it? Not HEX.
Yeah.
If you're like, the longer that you pay that debt off for, basically the smaller you make the bill, because the argument goes that it should move with the CPI, the inflation rate. So that is however much money you've taken out as a loan from the government has to be paid back at the same level, the same value as what it was when it was first lent to you. So obviously, as inflation increases, that, I don't know, let's say you took out $15,000, that $15,000 actually becomes less and less as time goes on because of inflation. It's worth less and less because, prices go up. So the only way you can sort of even that out, you can never get it perfect, but the only way you can approximately make it hold the same value over all that length of time is to let it move with the CPI, with the inflation rate. That to me actually seems pretty fair, that you pay it back at the same value before. And I don't think this really makes sense when the Islamic clerics say this is sinful and that the practice of indexation is sinful, because this is not interest. It's not compound interest or even interest at all, which, look, I'm obviously no expert on Islam, but my understanding with Islamic banking and prohibitions on usury was basically that, well, the one thing, like you said, you can't make money off, something that you're not working on, you're just a passive, like a parasite on it, or charging interest on something. So like a credit card or whatever, which is why you do have the institution of Islamic banking in the Middle East. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but, supposedly you can take out an interest-free loan. I don't know how they make their money, but yeah. So, but look, what they're generally just talking about here is that university course prices are going up all the time. And that's to do mainly with the foreign student trade, which is a $40 billion a year industry in Australia. And also the simple fact that too many people are going to uni. A lot of people who should not be going to uni do. A lot of the time they might just go for 2 years and then bomb out, and it was all just a big waste of time. So, again, those issues need to be addressed. And by the way, all of these people that they're complaining about, these Islamic people are complaining about, should not be in Australia in the first place.
Oh, of course.
So it should not
it goes without saying that all of my commentary, for the umpteenth time, I am in no way, shape or form proposing a red-brown alliance of Muslims being allowed to stay in Australia. That's definitely not what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of picking apart this. I've had a quick search online just to triple check what the exact statements are as far as the Islamic religion is concerned. They themselves can't define what it's called, or the phonetic phrase is riba. Specifically, that's one of the hadiths. No, it's mentioned by the hadiths, condemned several times in the Quran. It turns out there are some Islamic scholars who say, and I quote, "There are three things. If God's messenger had explained them clearly, it would have been dearer to me than the world and what it contains. These are kalala, riba, and kilfa." So basically, the Muslim scholars are actually admitting, yeah, we don't fucking know what the messenger from Allah meant when he said a ban on riba, which is generally understood to be interest above and beyond the principle. And one other website that caught my eye was islamicmarkets.com. They're making the argument that no, indexation and inflation are not a violation of the riba commandment. So it'll be, I might have to dig into this just for my own curiosity, but at the same time, while I don't think they're going to be successful, if they manage to get as far as at least giving the universities a bloody nose over this matter, I'll consider that good enough.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, I don't have any problem with debt forgiveness or anything like that. Although I would go back, I actually think Gough Whitlam had the best model for university, which is you make it free and anyone can get in. However, you got to have the grades. And if you go in and you start failing, well, you get kicked out and you're not allowed back in again. And that, by the way, would actually, I guarantee that would actually cost us less money. It would. You would
Of
save
course.
money.
Enough people would just flunk out and not bother to re-enroll and like actually pick up some form of employment. I mean, that's really getting to the heart of the problem, is that university was never meant to be for everyone. It was meant to be sort of finishing school for the up and coming elite functionaries that would then go on to serve the state in one or more capacities. Then it became a social, I think it always was a status signal. Like that's where the Americans get their concept of the Ivy Leagues from. I'm not sure if we have anything like that in Australia.
We kind of do. Yeah.
You know, it's like we have a network of universities where it doesn't matter what you study or get from them, as long as you can say, "Oh, I've been to this as my father and my father before him." Like it's the managerial class having a mechanism to recruit the next generation that will sort of take over the reins. This idea you go to university, get a college degree or get a university degree, and somehow that will grant you a career. I don't think that was ever the case. Like that was always an Americana myth.
It's increasingly not the case. You know, I mean, certainly
I'd say it's not the case at all. Like as of certainly as of the last 5 or 6 years, just because you have a uni degree doesn't mean you're getting a job. Like I think that's really where the conversation needs to be centered. I don't want to pontificate too far.
Yeah, and we're
coming up to the top of the third hour here, but having a uni degree just means you sat and passed a bunch of exams. It doesn't mean you know shit. And especially when you're 21 years old, it's like, what the fuck could you possibly know at 21 that makes you employable? If a uni degree is the only thing you have to your name.
I mean, it's unlikely to give you that competitive edge against someone who has not gone to university, for example, unless it's like engineering or something. But
final words would be, I've got to propose at least a solution rather than just backing out the current thing. I think going back to a medieval style guilds and trades system where you're interested in performing a profession, the guild or merchants association, they would take you into their wing and you do study on the job, where instead of just allowing airheaded 20-somethings to sit around and huff their own farts for 3 years, it's like, no, you can study the career that you want, but only in the context of an organization that will give you a path to employment. So instead of having these centralized education facilities that are just for that, I'm not saying we should abolish them completely, but I like the idea that you get a work experience thing as part of your education, as in you get placed into the environment once you've done, like, say, a year's worth of theory, and then you get thrown on the tools, even if that happens to be an IT job or a law job or some other one. It's not just for the blue collar stuff. I think we should be doing that for the white collar jobs of, you want to be in a marketing department. Now, arguably marketing shouldn't exist as a career profession choice, but I'll grant the premise just to say, if you want to do these things, okay, you've got to do that within the context of an already existing organization. Like, you can't just rock up and study this shit in the abstract for 3 or 4 years. You've got to have a employer sponsor your education into that profession. And I think doing that where tertiary education is presented as, and here's the training you are going to receive that will lead to your employment, because that way you're squaring the circle of, you're forcing young people to sort of think, all right, what am I actually good at? What can I do that I will be paid to do? And I'm not going to be, soaking up taxpayer dollars doing all other kinds of bullshit.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with the employer sponsor thing in that, shock horror, the reason that you go to university, it should be told to people it's to get a job. All right. Mm-hmm. It's not to be indoctrinated. It's not to learn how to think more critically or whatever. No, you go there to get a job at the end of it. And yeah, that employer sponsor thing, I think, should particularly apply to anyone who wants to study the humanities. Maybe not law, but if you want to get an arts degree,
no, I think law should be included. I mean, that's kind of how they have like the law guilds, like those are still a real thing, and I don't know exactly.
No, I'm not saying. Yeah, I just mean that, like, when I say the humanities, I'm not really counting the law.
Yeah,
I mean like stuff like sociology and philosophy or something like that. You better demonstrate a damn good reason why you want to study that. Okay, either you want to be an academic, or maybe you want to combine it with journalism or something like that. But otherwise, if you're just going to do a 3-year philosophy degree, you might as well wipe your ass with it. Okay, it's worth fucking nothing. So you better justify it.
I think there should be some allowance made for people that want to study entirely elective courses, which is what history and art would fall under, because no one's going to employ you with a degree in that. You're studying that because you have a passion for those subjects and you want to do this. But at the same time, that's just you wanting someone else to pay for you to sit around at home and read history books all day. It's like, I want to do that as well, but I know that's a bad thing to ask society to do.
The idea that the public should support you publicly in doing that is a joke.
Yeah, I think it should be a case of if there is to be an allowance made for such things, it has to be entirely self-funded. I know some people are going to shit and scream and rage and squeal and say, oh, that would mean that the arts will only be the domain of the rich and the wealthy. I'm like, I'm not opposed to that, because maybe it'll keep the common riffraff out, who are the biggest fart huffers of the left, are middle-class students who want to study feminist slam poetry. If it keeps those people out, I would consider that a net good. But at the same time, people are apt to point out that just because we're coming up to the 10-year anniversary, Zoe Quinn, the chief slut actress of the Gamergate kerfuffle, she actually came from a very rich family, the Van Valkenburgs.
Her pronouns are they, them, thank you.
Oh, whatever, fuck it. But no, she was able to study computer game design specifically because daddy's money paid for it. So, of course, my system of proposed fixes doesn't account for daddy's little princess being sent off to adult daycare to play with MS Paint for 12 hours a day. But at the same time, no solution is ever going to cover every frigging rough edge. So, and I think there's also something to be said for the fact that NSDAP Germany managed to open up the arts for a lot of its working class, where they paid through the Strength Through Joy program, I believe, funded tickets for the working class to attend operas and things of that sort. So I don't automatically assume that just because we've closed the tap at the universities that the arts would only be available to the wealthy. Like, there are other ways of, like, that's a problem that should be solved outside of the domain of what we're discussing here.
Right.
So.
Okay. Well, guys, we gave you almost another 3-hour one. There was actually more in the prep. I just kind of skipped over some of the boring stuff. But anyway, that is where we will leave it. I hope you enjoyed it. Check us out at theracer.biz. Of course, very happy Australia Day too. Enjoy it while you still can. And we will see you next week.
See ya.